It was only when the endless yellow fields of ripe wheat were left behind, along with the clouds of dust kicked up by the wheels of the departing cab, that Monica and her daughter Kayla were finally able to look around and assess the situation. "Mom, how are we supposed to live here? Don't we have any neighbors? What about the playground? And the merry-go-rounds?" asked the 8-year-old girl, leaning on her crutch. Monica looked at her daughter with concern. What could she say in her unenviable position? To get such a house was considered a great fortune. However, she would not leave her daughter's question unanswered. "It's okay, Kayla. We'll live, we'll see, and the neighbors will be friends. And we'll organize our own comforts. Now let's try to open the door. We have the keys." Kayla nodded and looked again at the gloomy house that looked like a witch's dwelling from a fairy tale. Divorce. Monica had never lived in a private house before. She'd always lived in an apartment. It's easier there. All the amenities are at hand. But that was before. And now there wasn't much choice. Consider bankrupt barely scraped together the money to move to this suburban house. "Are there wolves or bears around here? There's a forest nearby. Wouldn't watermen come out of the river?" Kayla asked again and looked doubtfully toward the nearest wooded area. Monica smiled and jokingly tugged her daughter's pigtail with a bright bow. "There you go, watching cartoons again. You should read a book about animals or something." Kayla flicked the tip of her tongue at her mother's joking tone. "I have read about animals. Well, there are all kinds of animals. Some are kind, and some are not so kind." "Never mind. Most often animals do not come too close to human habitation. There's no such thing as watermen," Monica said, and walked to the shabby door of the house, about to open it. The keys given to her by Bill, the former owner, had a distinctive beard, as if from a tale of a castle with a drawn hearth. The house itself looked dilapidated. The closed shutters were covered in green moss, the roof was sad and wistful, and the network of small cracks in the walls made her worry for its integrity. "Well, there's a lot of work to be done here," Monica thought sadly, and turned the key in the keyhole. At the same time, there was a distinctive click, and the door slid forward smoothly. The hinges creaked softly, and the smell of dampness wafted into her face. Bill had told her that during floods the water from the nearby river came almost to her doorstep. If it hadn't been for the relative cheapness of the place and the circumstances, she would never have agreed to such a deal. She'd rather have demanded her money back than get involved in this dubious business of paying off a debt with someone else's inheritance. Leaning on her crutch, Kayla obediently followed her mother into the house. In moments of excitement, she became particularly noticeable in her voice, which caused Monica great anxiety. "Mom, why is it so dirty and smells like a basement?" Kayla asked childishly, unceremoniously. Monica smiled. "But what can you do? This house is ours now. We'll open the windows to air it out and tidy it up." Kayla shrugged uncertainly and wanted to go inside, but her mother held her by the shoulder, trying to find the light switch. The house was dark. Monica was afraid her daughter would trip and fall. At that moment, a strange sound came from the back of the room, reminding Monica of a sigh or a groan. "Oh, who's that?" "A house cat," Kayla exclaimed fearfully. Leaving her daughter's question unanswered, Monica carefully pulled her smartphone out of her pocket and turned on the flashlight on it. The bright beam cut through the gloomy total darkness of the house and began to scrupulously search the walls, floor, and far corners of the room. At first glance, nothing unusual. An ordinary building with a pile of junk on the floor, cobwebs and dust everywhere you could reach with your hand. Monica was about to think she was imagining things when the mysterious sound came again. It gave her the opportunity to see something strange next to the pile of rags. "What the hell is that?" she whispered and stepped closer. Only now it was clear that it was some kind of animal, a rather large one. It was also, by the looks of it, seriously injured. Monica pointed the beam of light in the right direction and almost immediately saw that it was a dog, whose eyes glistened with tears. "Well, that dog, you see, even his tail hurts," Kayla asked anxiously. Monica nodded and gently touched the dog with her hand. He whimpered softly and tried to lift his head. At that moment, Monica noticed a distinctive wound in the back. The blood was already caked on it, which meant that the dog had been injured several hours ago. Monica was not immediately able to understand how the dog had gotten into the house. She found out a little later, when she finally found the light switch and the room was flooded with a nice yellow light. Monica looked around and immediately noticed the second exit from the house, the doors of which were partially broken and crumbled from time. Most likely, having been injured, the dog had taken refuge in this abandoned house and was left to die. Monica had heard once that animals tend to do this. Sensing imminent doom, they leave the house and hide wherever they can. Suddenly she felt sorry for the poor thing and decided to save it by all means. "Kayla, please sit down in this chair. See, you're going to trip and fall. I'm going to try to help this poor man," Monica said curtly and started to work. Of course, she didn't have much in the way of medicine, except for some greens and hydrogen peroxide from Kayla's medicine cabinet. Since Monica's childhood and adolescence had been difficult, she knew how to administer first aid, at least to animals for sure, transferring the dog to a more or less clean rag found here. Monica began to treat the wound, saying that there was nothing more to be done about them. "He'll live, won't he?" Kayla asked anxiously, whose eyes immediately filled with tears. Monica shuddered. A disturbing thought flashed through her mind. No, not again. "I can't let the dog die in front of my daughter." This thought gave her strength and made her act with redoubled vigor. The fact was that 3 months ago, Kylie's grandmother's life had been cut short by an insidious heart attack that had left a lasting impression on her granddaughter. Moreover, everything happened in front of Kayla, who on that fateful day stayed at her grandmother's house for a couple of days. When Roberta suddenly felt bad, Kayla immediately rushed to the phone to call an ambulance. But no matter how much she spun the disc, it was all in vain. The situation was aggravated by the fact that Roberta hated cell phones, so she always used a landline. Unable to call the doctors, Kayla tried to help her grandmother. Tiny hands began to do indirect heart massage, as she had once seen in the movies. But it was useless. Not every adult can cope with such a task. How could a child? Realizing that her beloved grandmother was leaving, Kayla jumped out of the house and rushed to the neighbors, knocking on the door, calling the intercom, crying and asking for help. Unfortunately, despite the fact that the ambulance arrived without delay, Robert could not be saved. The resuscitator did everything possible and impossible, even using a defibrillator discharge. But the miracle didn't happen. Monica lost her mother, whom she loved with all her heart. Later, she often blamed herself for the fact that she was not there at such a crucial moment. As luck would have it, that day she was suing her ex-husband, Jordan, who with the help of a clever combination decided to take away her restaurant. And why did I agree to all of this? Why? Listen to a lawyer, take it to court. I would have been better off just giving him the restaurant. I would have saved my nerves and my sanity. And maybe I would have saved my mom. Monica blamed herself. Unfortunately, the departure of her grandmother made an indelible impression on little Kayla, who experienced a strong nervous shock that affected her development. The girl spent about a week in bed, unable to get up and take a step on her own. Monica called the doctors, appealed to specialists, but all of them only spread their hands. They said that there is a severe nervous breakdown. After all, it was the realization of his own powerlessness in the face of death made Kayla experience extremely unpleasant moments of his life. It was not until 3 weeks after the incident that Kayla was able to sit up and therefore moved only in a wheelchair. About 2 weeks ago, Kayla began to get up little by little, walking around the room. Of course, it was still a long way from complete healing. However, Monica perfectly understood that it was necessary to protect her daughter's health and take care of her, no matter what. And now, rescuing a stray dog, she wanted Kayla to believe in miracles and the power of human kindness. To the dog's credit, he endured all the manipulations steadfastly, never once trying to snap or growl, only when he was in particular pain. He whimpered softly and looked at Monica with his tear-wet eyes. "Hush, hush, bear it, but don't cry. It'll get better. I'm not a veterinarian or a doctor, but I understand something. When I was a child, I saw a calf mauled by a wolf. The wounds were even more serious. But he made it through. Though I owe a lot of credit to my grandmother. She was good at herbs. She could make potions that no one could make. I wish I could find some chamomile and make a decoction," Monica whispered sadly, treating the wound. She concluded that it had probably been stabbed. "Who would want to hurt you?" "Some scoundrel," Monica whispered. Only now she noticed that the dog was wearing a good yellow collar around his neck. The appearance of the collar showed that it was expensive. "Look at you. I thought you were homeless. You have a collar, and I think there's a tag on it. What does it say? Your name or something? Phone number's hard to see. It's covered in dirt and blood." "Okay, I'll look at it again later and everything will be clear," Monica said, and covered the dog with a blanket she found in the room. For some unknown reason, Monica immediately realized that the pet would make it. Monica just looked into his eyes and saw the strongest desire to live. "There, that's better. Oh, thank God we found you and Kayla in time. Otherwise, you'd be in that house for the rest of your life. It's really out in the middle of nowhere," Monica said, and looked at her daughter. A sweet smile played on Kayla's lips. It was exactly the effect she wanted after the shock of her grandmother's death. Kayla rarely smiled. She was always wary, but today she suddenly blossomed when she saw her mom as a real heroine. Truth be told, Monica didn't think she'd done anything special. She had rescued a stray dog, helped him, but she couldn't pass it by, Monica thought, and went to the closed windows to turn the special lever that allowed her to open the shutters and let the bright sunlight into the house. Even though it was nearing evening, it was still quite bright outside. The gentle rays of the sun instantly transformed the room beyond recognition. Deciding not to clean the whole house at once, Monica chose one room she liked and started cleaning it immediately. She chose the part of the house where there was a small sofa and a bed. Monica was going to give the bed to her daughter, and she wanted to sit on the sofa herself. Fortunately, there was a well behind the house full of cold water. And in the barn there were a couple of buckets, which turned out to be quite serviceable and did not leak. Soon Monica was wielding a kind of mop made of a piece of stick and a small T-shaped bar. My former employees should see me now, she thought with a smile, remembering how she had been a restaurant owner a month ago and looking forward to the future with confidence. Perhaps Kayla would have grown her business to a huge size over time if it hadn't been for Jordan, who at some point in his life had suddenly decided to turn his attention to his mistress. This despite the fact that the two of them were raising an 8-year-old daughter together. Unlike Kayla, the death of her mother-in-law did not make any impression on Jordan. He did not come to the funeral and generally acted as if Roberta was completely indifferent to him. He had once asked her for Monica's hand in marriage. Yes, exactly, asked, standing on one knee, holding out a huge bouquet of snow-white roses. I'm sad to think of it. Monica couldn't hold back the tears. Of course, at the time, Jordan thought she was still worthy of such courtship, since she'd just opened her own restaurant and had established herself as the new leader in the business. Jordan, on the other hand, was working at some run-down auto repair shop. And he wasn't exactly a star. Dirty, oil-covered hands, bruised knuckles from constant contact with tools and wrenches, and a perpetual sadness in his eyes caused by lack of money, and also clothes from a cheap sale, bought a couple sizes larger than what he needed in reality. It so happened that at the time of his acquaintance with Monica, Jordan managed to get into a bad situation, crashed a client's car when he decided to go to it for auto parts. Having failed to control the new powerful SUV, Jordan rammed the flower stall, thus significantly increasing the amount of loss. Fortunately, there was no one in the booth as the vendor was just receiving her merchandise. Reviewing the vendor's offered assortment in the interior of the flower van, the conversation at the owner's car service was short. Jordan had been assigned a huge debt that he had to pay off within a year. How would he do it? No one cared, of course, because the businessman had in his possession a DVR tape taken the very moment Jordan got behind the wheel of someone else's car. The young locksmith was crying, on his knees and literally ready to fulfill any whim of the owner, so that he only forgave him the debt. But Leslie was adamant. It is difficult to say what would have ended this whole story with the payment of debt, if one day a businesswoman named Monica did not have a punctured wheel of the car parked on the side of the road. And of course she could not replace it herself and looked around confusedly, waiting for help from passers-by or passing cars. Jordan was passing by and realized that this was his chance to prove himself. Kneeling down, he set the jack and removed the wheel in no time. It took the guy no more than 10 minutes to do the whole thing, which was a clear indication of his undoubtedly good skills. Only a real wizard, Monica said with a smile, and reached for her wallet to pay for her savior's services. Jordan shook his head negatively, feeling that if he took the money, the thread of sympathy between them would break in an instant. No need for money. Let's have dinner at the cafe. Over there, you see, around the corner. That'll be my payment. How would you like that? Monica thought about it. Nothing serious was going on in her life at that moment. There were suitors, of course, but none of them was even close to being a legitimate fiancé, much less a future husband. She glanced at the grimy Jordan, waved her hand, and agreed. In principle, Monica had always considered herself a determined woman and was never afraid to bring something new into her life. Going to the cafe with Jordan, she did not even suspect that she was going to meet her future husband. Their stormy romance spun so suddenly that was a complete surprise to all acquaintances. Monica herself could not understand what attracted her to this unpleasant-looking young man of medium height. Skinny, wiry, his face was also hard to call handsome. However, it was not repulsive either. He would pass by on the street, and you wouldn't even notice him. But Monica somehow noticed, and not only noticed, but also agreed to accept the marriage proposal. But her mother warned her, asking her not to rush the events, to wait for the necessary period. As a school teacher, she was a good judge of people, and saw that there was no love in Jordan's eyes at all. Perhaps there was personal sympathy or delight, caused by the possibility of gaining access to the financial assets of the future wife. Sneaky Jordan was holding out until the last possible moment. Didn't mention the huge debt he was carrying. He told about it a week before the wedding, thus putting the bride before the fact. Of course, Monica was upset, but not so much to be left without a man without whom she could not imagine her future life. Having paid off her fiancé's debt in full, Monica felt truly happy. There were no more secrets between her and Jordan. She hadn't realized how wrong she'd been. Kayla's voice brought her out of her agonizing musings. "Mom, why don't we eat something? My stomach is churning like a small volcano." Monica looked at her daughter with a smile and said, "Yes, of course, now I'll get a couple of sandwiches and a thermos with tea from my suitcase, and tomorrow I'll go to the store and buy food for something more serious." Kayla looked anxiously at her mother. "What about you? There's only 2 sandwiches. I'll eat them. What are you going to do? Go hungry?" Monica smiled. "Come on, Kayla, nothing's going to happen to me. I'm used to it, and I could use a couple extra pounds. Eat up. You need to grow up, get better." She said that and started to set the table, which she wiped with a cloth before the meal. Despite her mother's request, Kayla still shared her sandwich with her. She didn't rest until she'd eaten it. Tears glistened in Monica's eyes. "But I raised a good daughter, 8 years old, and she already understands everything and behaves like an adult, she thought. In addition to the joy of her daughter's success, she was at a loss as to who had attacked the dog, which had an inconspicuous yellow collar with a tiny medal around its neck. But it was clear that the dog belonged to someone and had probably run away from home. This happens when, having noticed an attractive female, the dog forgets everything in the world and runs after her for several kilometers. Most often, such large dogs return home on their own trail. But sometimes there are exceptions, and then dogs are lost forever. "What are we going to name the dog?" Kayla asked cautiously. Monica frowned. "I don't know. He has a tag on his collar. I'll wipe it off with some wet wipes and we'll find out what his name is. Also, I think I can find his owner's phone number on there." Kayla nodded understandingly and waited for her mother to fulfill her promise. As it turned out, the dog's name was Peaches, and at the bottom was indeed his owner's phone number. "Mom, why don't we not call for a while and let Peaches stay with us? And I won't be so scared. I know that when the dog is in the house, the wolves won't come to us," Kayla pleaded. Monica shook her head. "What can I say? Fine, you want him to stay. I don't know where he's going to go in his condition, and when he heals, we'll decide whether or not to call the owner." The time flew by. After a hearty dinner, Kayla started to get a little groggy. "Okay, sweetie, let's go to bed. It's getting late. I'm going to stay up a little longer. I'm not getting any sleep. I'll think about what we should do next," Monica said. "Good, but please don't give Peaches away. Okay? I want to wake up tomorrow morning and see him sleeping in the same room with me," Kayla asked. Monica smiled and promised to fulfill her request. She went into the other room and sat on a chair next to the window. She watched as the stars lit up one by one and the yellow moon took its usual position in the sky. Unbeknownst to herself, Monica was plunged back into memories that were more painful than the previous ones. She'd realized Jordan was cheating on her about a year ago. At first, it had seemed like a coincidence. Jordan came home late from work. He was late once, twice. That's nothing to be alarmed about, especially since her husband had never let it happen before. But the further it went, the clearer it became that her husband was cheating on her. Once, having seen a lipstick stain on the collar of his shirt, Monica made a terrible scandal, which, however, to no avail. "Honey, it was an accident. We were hugging during a business meeting, and maybe the makeup lady carelessly touched the collar of my shirt with her lips. Well, that's the way they do it, hugging, kissing. I can't stand all that bodily tenderness," Jordan said. Monica believed it, trying to convince herself that nothing terrible had happened. Then she began to notice the smell of women's perfume coming from her husband's shirts, and one day she saw a purple hickey on his neck. The situation was aggravated by the fact that at that time Monica least of all needed a divorce, because her mother was already seriously ill, and she had to deal with several cases at the same time. Jordan, on the other hand, had taken a job as a managerial trainee at a trading firm at his wife's suggestion. At first, Monica was happy about her husband's success, but when it became clear that he is engaged in the office is not only work, and something else, she became uncomfortable. And Jordan himself has changed, becoming more powerful and uncompromising. Naturally, Monica's position at that time was still strong, and therefore no one could not even think that a little less than a year later, and she will lose the restaurant, giving it to her husband by court order. And it all started with the fact that Monica's establishment began to suffer serious losses. Trying to find the cause, she held conversations with employees, wanted to talk to them, guide them to the right path. Frankly speaking, Monica used to trust people and never saw them as enemies. And as it happened, it was her gullibility that caused all the subsequent problems. First of all, the quality of the food served deteriorated. Noticing this, Monica decided to change the cook, by what unintentionally caused irreparable damage to the restaurant. As it turned out, the cook was not at fault at all. Since the purchase of products was carried out directly by the administrator, in fact, the cook should have just cooked something acceptable from what was available. And the quality of the food was not his responsibility at all. Unfortunately, Monica found out about it too late, when the administrator Max has already turned to the full. In addition, the tax service conducted a large-scale audit, which revealed serious violations in the conduct of business. Actually, Monica knew nothing about it, although she suspected that it was all the work of Max, but in the end, the administrator was not to attract for what. So it was Monica who had to answer. Having learned the amount to be paid as compensation for the damage to the city budget, she grabbed her head. How could it be? Where was the tax money going? Max only smirked meaningfully, because he knew that he had cut all the strings leading to him long ago. Suspecting his involvement in the case, Monica fired the administrator. But it was no use. Trying to find that huge sum, she turned to her companions and spent hours in the waiting rooms of bankers. But no one wanted to give her money, afraid of impending bankruptcy. At the same time, Monica was ready to swear everything she had if she repaid the debt, the restaurant will work as before. Trying to find the money, she sold her car, wanted to mortgage her apartment, when help came from a place where it was not expected. To Monica's amazement, it was Jordan who provided the solution. "Honey, I realize you think I'm a cheater and a liar, but I sincerely want to help you." Monica raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Really? And how can you help me? Can you find the money?" Jordan nodded with dignity. "Yes, I can. I already have. I talked to the director of my firm and he can give you a large sum. But of course on the security of the apartment and all the property, including the restaurant." Monica shook her head uncertainly. "No, Jordan, it doesn't work like that. This is something too much like a fairy tale. And your director, is he a magician?" Jordan smiled. "I know. No, he's not, is he? Paul is a man with a solid reputation. I think you know who I'm talking about, don't you?" Monica nodded uncertainly, still unsure how to proceed. Paul was certainly an extraordinary person. He was feared by many, as he had several prison sentences under his belt. However, not all of them he served behind bars, because often everything ended up in the courtroom with a suspended sentence. And then, after another time in jail, Paul allegedly took the mind and decided to go into business. Specifically, usury. In the spirit of "I'll lend you a penny, and you'll pay me back tomorrow." 3. And now this very man with a criminal record is ready to lend a helping hand. Although if it were not for her mother's illness and all the subsequent events, Monica would never in her life would not have gone for this deal. Deciding to take a risk, she drew up all the necessary documents at the notary, who became a guarantor of the transfer of money. And in half an hour, as if by magic, she became the owner of a very tidy sum. Now all she had to do was to pay off the tax arrears and continue to work in peace. But what actually happened next divided her life into before and after. After all, Monica had not had time to move away from the notary's office and 200 meters as two young men in caps ran up to her in the parking lot and snatched from her a bag of money. Perhaps Monica should have used a security guard or someone else. But as we all know, we're all smart in hindsight. She was no exception. After all, Monica was not herself at that moment and was in a hurry to transfer the money and pay off the debt as soon as possible. The problem arose also in the fact that Paul flatly refused to transfer the amount by wire transfer because he recognized only the cash form of cooperation. This ruined Monica, who became a victim of unknown personalities who took everything from her. That's when the young businesswoman began to have real problems. Since the pledge for the amount issued by Paul was specified exactly real estate and restaurant, and therefore in the case of non-payment of the debt, Monica lost it all in an instant. "Oh my God, what is this?" "Everywhere you look, all enemies, barely holding back tears," she whispered, step by step analyzing the situation. Monica became increasingly convinced that she became a victim of her unfaithful husband, who sang with an unscrupulous creditor, who decided to embezzle someone else's real estate and business. Naturally, she tried to contact the police. But from the point of view of the law and the transaction, all the necessary conditions were observed. However, she was not satisfied. She filed a petition with the court. Except that the lawyers hired by Jordan, Paul on the head, broke Monica's accusation in court, leaving her with literally nothing. The death of her mother, bankruptcy and betrayal of her husband demoralized the unfortunate woman, completely deprived of the ability to think straight. Probably if it wasn't for Kayla, Monica would have finally fallen into the abyss of depression, where looking down at the blue water from the bridge seemed to be the only way out. Trying to find some solution, Monica opened her notebook in despair and began to look through the list of her debtors. She had long forgotten about many of them. Some of them she had forgiven, but now it was time to collect the stones. The most valuable and promising of the debtors was Bill, a young man who had borrowed money from her to open a vegetable stand at the local market. Before, enjoying the fruits of her restaurant business, Monica did not hurry the businessman with the payment of the debt, and every time gave him a delay, which with each month only increased in the interval. But now there was nothing to choose. Having buried her mother, she was left without housing with a young daughter in her arms, who in addition suffered from the consequences of the nervous shock. Well, was not Ben, anyway there is no other choice, thought Monica. She picked up the phone and dialed Bill's number. The debtor picked up the phone, hoping that the creditor would calm down and give him a reprieve again. But when this did not happen, and Monica sent him a video message with a request to return the debt, Bill realized there would be no return. Naturally, he didn't have any money on hand. His business was a mess. The profits were barely enough to make ends meet. After setting up a meeting at a discreet cafe, Bill got to the point. Listen, Monica, here's the deal. I'm going to say this right off the bat. Well, I don't have any money, but I do have a little house in the suburbs. I inherited it. The appraiser did an independent appraisal. Well, the amount of money from the sale of the house will cover the amount of my debt, but frankly, you'll have a housewarming party left over. So, look, you can move in on your own. Sell it if you want. I won't object. In fact, it's my inheritance. But I don't want to live there. Monica raised an eyebrow in surprise. You don't want to live there? Why don't you sell it yourself? What's stopping you? I, by the way, gave you real money, and instead you give me some wreck in the suburbs. Bill bit his lip resentfully. Why a rundown place? The land is expensive, you know. There's a forest and a river nearby. Any businessman would give his last to buy that house. And Monica's eyes were filled with despair. She'd given this man money. And now he says there's no money. But Bill can offer her some shabby little house he inherited. Anyway, she didn't have any other choice. Suing Bill for that money, especially after she'd failed so miserably, losing the lawsuits to Jordan and his patron Paul, was a laughing matter. Also, if Monica had been more attentive, she would have recognized right away that her husband's mistress had become Paul's adopted daughter, Hannah, who, in fact, had convinced the suitors to pull such a scam and deprive the business of his wife. Naturally, in such an unenviable position, Monica could not compete with Eitan and his team. After all, if she repeated something like this, she could easily receive criminal penalties for defamation or worse. Eitan's lawyers were so skillful that they could make a real scandal out of the smallest thing. All right, God be with you. Give me the keys and the deed to the house, and you can consider your debt canceled, Dorothy said with a sad sigh. Only now, looking at the golden column, Monica realized that she had made a mistake in agreeing to this deal. Just like that, without looking. The fact was that the house was obviously worth less than what Bill owed on market day. It could hardly be sold for half of the agreed amount. But there was no other choice. I had to save my daughter. The decisive factor in moving to the suburbs were the words of Kayla's doctor. You, Monica, could use a change of location. Fresh air, river, pets. Horses, cows. It's the kind of thing that gets a child distracted and out of his own way. I would recommend to visit the racetrack more often and ride horses. And believe me, these animals can cure many ailments. It is not for nothing that in the past the horse was considered to be a friend of man, not a dog. I hope you understand me. Monica nodded. Marik? Of course I understand. We've just been offered a small house in the suburbs. Austin smiled. Well, that's great. Don't worry about Kayla's limp. It'll go away. Not right away, but it's still something to strive for. The doctor's words were etched in Monica's memory. Looking at the stars, she sat by the window and cried. What are we going to do now? But we moved to this house, and everything is fine. The forest, the river. What's next? Jordan's good too. He's so slick, he's left me with no alimony. It's understandable. Paul's not the only one involved. Yeah, he's got him under his wing pretty good, I'll say. He must have seen Jordan in the office and started working him over. Slipped him his daughter. And Jordan had always had a weakness for women, Monica thought. She stayed up until almost midnight, and then she went to bed. Before she did, she kissed Kayla, who was asleep, on the cheek and stroked the head of the cat, who had been watching her with an attentive gaze the whole time. The next morning, Monica was up at the crack of dawn. This was always the case when she slept in an unfamiliar place. Yes, and this shabby little house could hardly be called very comfortable. I wonder who left it to Bill as an inheritance. Grandmother or grandfather? Monica thought ironically, going to visit the local store. As it turned out, it was located about 1 kilometer from where they lived. Having decided to buy something tasty for breakfast, she took the plaid bag found in the hallway and set off. The journey was interesting and full of pleasant impressions. First, Monica met a shepherd who was driving a small herd of cows. Then a local letter carrier on a bicycle waved hello. He was followed by a couple of fishermen hurrying to the river with homemade rods and buckets for the catch. Her mood was visibly improving. When she was in public, she felt much better than when she was alone. As she approached the store, Monica saw 2 grandmothers who were talking about something of their own, interrupting each other. She said hello politely, realizing in her heart that there would probably be no response. The fact was that she knew of the dislike of the villagers for the newcomers from the city. But in this case she was wrong, because the grandmothers immediately reciprocated. Good afternoon, sweetheart. You must have moved into the late Sam's house. Remembering Bill's last name, Monica smiled. Yes, that's right. I bought that house. One of the grandmothers nodded in agreement, then continued. Then it's the right thing to do, dearie. Because Bill's such a troublemaker, the house would have fallen apart soon enough. So maybe you'll make some repairs. That and that. What about you? You got a husband, maybe? If I do, that's good. Because a house needs a man's hands. You can't do everything with women's hands. Monica bit her lip painfully, remembering that her husband was now lounging in Hannah's arms and laughing at how cleverly they had deceived her. I don't have a husband, divorced, just a daughter, Kayla, 8 years old. She has a slight limp, but it's temporary, Monica said discreetly, thinking the conversation was over. But as it turned out, they saw in the chatty grandmothers a great conversationalist. It will be hard for you, dear, but don't despair. In case of anything, we will always help. Come, we live on the outskirts of the village. We're sisters, twins actually, that's why we look so much alike, but we're not twins. So there's no mistaking it. I'm Sharon, and this is Samantha. And I'm Monica, she said with a smile. Well, we've met. We are generally wary of newcomers to the village, but we will make an exception for a woman with a child. So settle in, Settle in, there's a store here, and a post office, and even a medical center, if necessary. But we're in the middle of nowhere. You know, anything can happen. Monica was immediately alarmed. What could happen in such a quiet place? She asked. Sharon raised an eyebrow in surprise. Well, anything can happen. The other day, for instance, a businessman was robbed on the highway. You know, there's a road nearby. They found his car on the side of the road. Yellow, I got a bad feeling about it. There's blood on the seat. They say he was on his way to some kind of negotiation. He disappeared with the money. Cops searched the neighborhood all day, but they didn't find anything. The locals said the businessman had a dog with him, looked like a sheepdog, or something like that. And supposedly he always took it, never feared an attack, that's why. And the dog was like trained, that's the story. What happened to the dog? Monica couldn't help herself. Valentina smiled. Why? He ran away, probably. The strangler was frightened. Samantha's story seemed to Monica very strange and in some places even intriguing. The thing was that she had just yesterday sheltered an injured dog. And what if it is the same one, which was at the time of the attack with the businessman? And they never found the rich guy. Maybe they weren't looking hard enough? Monica asked cautiously, shifting from foot to foot. Sharon looked at her new acquaintance ironically. Come on, the cops have turned this place upside down. They've searched every nook and cranny, especially in the village. Monica nodded in agreement, and then politely said goodbye and went to the store for shopping. The store was very different from the city supermarket with its extensive system of discounts and write-offs of expired goods. However, Monica was not confused and quickly oriented herself. She bought eggs, cottage cheese, flour, sugar, and some other small things, deciding to bake her daughter cheesecakes or pancakes with cottage cheese. Or maybe both at once. Monica was a good cook, and those who had known her all these years didn't doubt it one bit. It was explained by the fact that at the beginning of her restaurant career, Monica worked as an assistant chef and learned many secrets and skills from him. If she wanted to, she could become a chef herself. But not in a high-end restaurant, but somewhere simpler, like a canteen or a small cafe. All the way back, she thought only about what she had learned from the older women. It was strange, but the injured dog and the missing businessman could be connected. Realizing this, Monica quickened her step, worried about leaving her daughter alone in the house. But as soon as she opened the door, she saw an extremely curious sight. Kayla was already up and sitting on the bed, stroking the withers of a noticeably stronger dog. Of course, Monica had heard before that everything healed quickly on a dog, but to heal at such a speed. However, taking a closer look, she noticed that the dog she had rescued was still weak, wobbling from side to side on his trembling legs. Apparently, the effects of the trauma were making themselves felt. For some reason, though, the dog flatly refused to lie down on the bed, always looking at the door, whining softly. Maybe he's feeling something, Monica thought, and stroked his head. Mom, are you a real magician? Look how Peaches feels better. Maybe you can stroke my leg and make me feel better, too, Kayla said. Monica smiled and immediately fulfilled her daughter's wish. She spared nothing for Kayla, neither time nor effort. Peaches, on the other hand, was behaving strangely. He started scratching the floor with his paws as if he wanted to go outside. But no, buddy, you're not going anywhere in that condition. You might as well collapse from weakness under a bush somewhere. And where will I look for you? Monica said with a negative shake of her head. But Peach had no intention of staying where he was, and soon resumed his efforts. Monica had seen a lot of things in her life, but she had never encountered such persistence on the part of a wounded animal before. Shouldn't we really open the door? Maybe he knows something, wants to help? No, we should call the number on his collar first. Maybe that will do something. Monica said and reached for the phone, then dialed the number engraved on the locket and put her ear to the speaker hopefully. That's where another disappointment awaited her. No one answered the call. Only the indifferent voice of the cellular network operator informed her that the subscriber was out of range. There you go, I still don't know anything. I thought I could play Sherlock Holmes, Monica thought sadly. Kayla, on the other hand, was glad that Master Percy hadn't answered. In her heart, she had already made up her mind. She wanted to keep the dog. She knew nothing about Percy's past or what had happened to his owner and decided not to let the dog outside. Monica began to prepare breakfast. She whisked flour, added eggs and sugar to taste. Then she poured some cottage cheese for Percy, who was in need of a particularly good meal. But the dog wouldn't eat and whimpered longingly, looking at the door as if a different life awaited him behind it. No, my friend, no. Don't even count on it. We'll do it some other time, and the police will be looking for your master. So don't worry, Monica said, and continued cooking. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Monica was startled and looked at her daughter. "Mom, I'll get it," said the girl and quickly went to the door. Monica visibly tensed and squeezed the dough. She wondered who had decided to show up, especially after what had happened in the country village just a couple of days ago. What was the surprise of the mother and daughter when they saw a fit young man in a police uniform on the doorstep? "Hi, I'm Lieutenant Spencer, your precinct commander. Tell me, have you seen anything suspicious lately?" he asked. Monica raised an eyebrow in surprise. "No, what could we have seen? We've been here for 2 days. I'm Monica, this is my daughter Kayla. I heard from the locals today that a businessman got mugged on the road. I think he even went to some business meeting or something." The policeman nodded and looked at Percy, who was sitting in the corner. "What's the matter with your dog? Is he sick?" Spencer asked. "I don't know, to tell you the truth," Monica said. "Bought this house and moved right in. Opened the door and there he was in the room, wounded. Apparently came in through the back door. He was bleeding, but I treated the wound and now we're nursing him back to health. I tried calling the number listed. The subscriber is out of range." This fact was of great interest to the policeman, especially in view of the fact that, according to eyewitnesses, the businessman went on a trip with his dog. Of course, I am not going to judge, but it seems to me that this is the same dog that became a victim of robbery. He probably tried to protect his master, and when he couldn't, he went to die wounded in an abandoned house, Monica suggested. The lieutenant hesitated. After a moment of silence, Spencer came up with another theory. What if the dog knows where his master is? Maybe we should let him out and follow him. Monica looked anxiously at the policeman. "I don't know, maybe so, but I'm genuinely worried about Peach. He's a poor thing. He's lost so much blood he could have died any minute. But Spencer wasn't about to give up. I'm so sorry, for God's sake. I know you like him, but there's a downside to that. Imagine that right now his master could be in need of help. And instead of saving him, we feel sorry for the dog and we could end up killing him," he said. Monica thought for a moment. A faint wrinkle appeared on her forehead. It wasn't an easy decision, as Kyla and Spencer realized at once. "Okay, but I'll go with you. What if the Peach gets sick? I'm going to carry him home and call the neighborhood vet. I think that dog deserves to be treated properly," Monica said. The lieutenant looked at the new homeowner with respect, but he didn't object and nodded in agreement. "And I'll water the plants so they don't dry out. And then let's get on our way. If you want, I can feed you," too, Monica added peacefully. The policeman smiled and accepted the offer to stay for breakfast. Spencer was a nice young man who, like Monica, had once lived in the city, but had moved to the middle of nowhere after problems with his bosses, having been exiled to the periphery. After a hearty breakfast, Monica, Spencer, and Peach set out to find his host. The policeman, mindful of the dog, tried not to rush him and treated him with emphasized attention and care. From time to time, he stopped to let Peach rest and breathe. Monica kept examining the wound on his back to make sure it wouldn't open up and bleed again, but everything was fine. Peach endured his mission and stubbornly walked on. It took a long time to walk. It took Monica and Spencer a little over an hour to do everything. Peaches walked with only a few stops until he led them into the middle of nowhere. For a moment, the precinct officer was nervous about trusting a wounded dog that could lead him nowhere. Monica, on the other hand, believed that Peach could sense something with his special canine sense of smell. There's a reason his tail is tucked and his ears are constantly alert. He was facing one way at all, but when the abandoned hunting hut appeared ahead, Spencer involuntarily reached for the gun holster hanging from his belt. Monica turned pale and gently placed a hand on the dog's scruff. "Hush, hush, honey. Just don't you dare bark. Stay here, please. I'll go check it out," Spencer whispered, ducking down and heading toward the hut. The door was unlocked. It was empty inside. But the floor, for some reason, had been scrubbed to a mirror-like shine, and it immediately seemed strange to the policeman. Looking more closely, Spencer noticed, to his amazement, an ingenious trapdoor leading to the basement. When he opened it, he gasped, then instinctively recoiled. The missing businessman was downstairs, his hands bound and gagged. At the moment when the policeman opened the cellar, no force in the world could hold Peach. He rushed to his master and began to lick him, though he could hardly stand on his feet from the sudden movements. The wound on the back of his head reopened and began to bleed. Fortunately, Monica was not slumbering. She immediately began to bandage it with her handkerchief. "But you see, I told you Peaches is very clever. He understands everything," she said. With tears in her eyes, she whispered. The dog's master was so weak that he could not utter a word. He didn't need to, though, because Spencer radioed for backup and an air ambulance from the district center. As it turned out later, the missing businessman Floyd had been injured, as well as his faithful pet, having been the victim of a robbery attack. He lost his money, but still managed to survive. The bandits, not having received an order regarding the further fate, did not dare to take responsibility for the murder. Therefore, the villains decided to hide the businessman in an abandoned hut, rather than act radically. Since Floyd had not had his wound treated during those 2 days, he was soon to undergo several operations. While owner Peaches prepared to undergo comprehensive treatment, I was in Monica's care. At some point, she became so attached to the pet that she began to consider him her own. Kayla was in complete agreement with her mom, and that's why she never called Peaches anything but her doggie. Precinct Spencer also did not waste time and as part of a task force conducted a large-scale investigation, which led him to the customers of the crime and the attack on the businessman Floyd. That's where Monica was in for another surprise. Perhaps this happens only once in a lifetime, when fate itself helps a person to restore justice. As it turned out later, to attack and rob businessman Floyd decided to attack and rob the same people who once took money from Monica in the parking lot. But even this was not the most curious, because a little later it became known that the raiders had the most direct relation to a man named Paul. Yes, the very Paul who once lent Monica money. And in fact, through fraud, took away from her restaurant business and all the real estate. When Monica heard about it, she immediately remarked my husband must have been involved. God knows what he's up to. Well, I'll try to find out what's going on. I can't promise anything yet. But if Jordan is involved, he'll be held accountable to the full extent of the law, Spencer said. Naturally, Monica didn't expect any serious results, so she just tried to get on with her life in the new place and took care of Kyle, paying more and more attention to her daughter. Monica made sure that she was slowly but surely on the mend. At one point, she even thanked fate for giving her the opportunity to take care of herself and her daughter. After all, before the business took so much time and effort that no other internal resources were simply not left for anything else. But now she and Kayla could go to the river and even try fishing for the first time in their lives. Peaches was always hanging around, treating them as family. Sometimes Kayla and Monica weren't alone on their walks, for they were often joined by Spencer, the neighborhood watchman. Of course, it wasn't about any serious feelings, but from the policeman's amorous look, they could guess a lot of things. The twin sisters, Sharon and Samantha, noticed it at once and nicknamed them bride and groom. The policeman himself denied it at first. Although judging by the enigmatic smile, Spencer was a little bit of a liar. Thanks to the investigation, businessman Paul, along with her ex-husband, became involved in a criminal case of fraud and attempt on human life, creating a criminal group. They robbed not only Monica, but also businessman Floyd. However, this did not benefit them, because soon all the defendants in the case had to answer for their crimes. Despite the fact that the money seized from the detainees were returned to the victims, Monica did not become a restaurant business. And so, after a short deliberation, she sold the restaurant to the very Floyd, who had undergone several operations and was now actively returning to his former life. In gratitude for his rescue, he, together with the money he gave Monica Peaches, who has already made his choice in favor of the girl and her mother. For Kayla, however, communication with neighbors clearly benefited. Therefore, within 3 months, she finally got rid of her stutter. Monica herself thanked fate for the fact that everything went this way, and not otherwise. She was able to find the true love of her life, a loving husband and a policeman by vocation. Rumor has it that after their marriage, Floyd became a frequent guest in their home. Considering Kayla his goddaughter, he was sure to give the girl gifts and walk with Peaches, who has not forgotten his former master and always met him at the door.
Late for work, Jessica saw her husband, who should be home, deciding to follow him. Jessica walked down the city streets, keeping her eyes on the backs of passers-by. For the first time in her life, she, an adult family woman, was following a man, and that person was her husband, Alex. Was Camila right? A colleague from work, who lived not far from this place, said she'd seen Alex a couple of times in a restaurant with a girl. A beautiful blonde, long-legged, stylish couple were discussing something animatedly. Occasionally, the lady stroked Alex's shoulder encouragingly. "You're wrong," Jessica said confidently. "Alex and I have always had a trusting, close relationship. We share our joys and worries with each other, tell each other how the day went." No, of course, Camila's wrong. She's only seen the man a couple of times in her life, so she's confused him with someone else. Camila was generally skeptical about Jessica's marriage. The woman's acquaintance with Alex had taken place practically in front of her eyes, and she had then confidently declared that the relationship had no prospects. "Oh, mate, if I were you, I wouldn't get enchanted before the time, so as not to be disappointed later," Camila said. "We've been there, we know. Everything hurts afterwards." Jessica realized that there was some truth in her colleague's words. But next to Alex, she felt so loved, so protected. He looked at her with love and tenderness, protected her, tried to please her. It could not be a deception. "It's not the experience," Camila said in response to Jessica's objections. "Right now, he really feels that you are the woman of his life, hormones, confetti, bouqueting period, all that. But as time passes, he'll take a sober look at the situation and realize everything." Jessica realized that maybe her friend was right. After all, Alex was so perfect, so handsome. His turquoise eyes and tanned face, the dimples on his cheeks when he smiled. Jessica was ready to admire his smile endlessly. She had never felt this way about anyone before. Alex, a lead engineer at a major oil company. He supervises almost 100 people. Alex is a smart, driven, grasping man. He had a prestigious university in the capital. He was offered to stay in Washington, but he did not want to leave his hometown. His elderly parents lived here. Alex was a late and only child. He couldn't leave his mom and dad. Having returned, he never once regretted it, in his own words. Alex's parents were wealthy people. His father, in the past a large by the standards of the city entrepreneur, the owner of a dairy plant, which brought large profits. Previously, he was allegedly engaged in the restaurant business in Washington, but after the birth of his son changed the occupation. The family moved from the capital to a quiet provincial town with developed infrastructure and good ecology. I always thought it was better to raise children in small towns, Kimberly, Alex's mother, said of the move many years ago. Contrary to silly stereotypes, Jessica has an ideal relationship with her in-laws. In a way, they replaced her parents, although they were more like grandparents in age. Jessica vaguely remembered her mom and dad. They died when she was 5 years old, going for mushrooms in the forest, and did not return. The girl was taken in by her grandmother, her mom's mom, who gave her everything she could. Jessica adored her grandmother, but at the age of 20 she was left all alone. Her last relative was gone. She wanted the love and support of a close person by her side. Probably that's why she got in touch with Bernard, who at first seemed to be perfect. When the tragedy occurred, Jessica was in her 3rd year of study at the University of Economics. She got into university thanks to her grandmother. From childhood, she encouraged her granddaughter to study and strive for a better life. Their small family, in Bridget's opinion, was not poor. At least they certainly did not starve. But the grandmother always lamented that she could not take her granddaughter to show her big cities and other countries. The girl did not understand these worries. Bridget was quite satisfied with her life. "I traveled the world thanks to my work," she said. She had been a train conductor all her life and had visited many interesting places. Grandma loved to reminisce about those happy times, and her granddaughter simply adored her stories. "Well, what are your years? Everything will still be," Bridget wondered. "What's so interesting about traveling?" "Yes, Grandma's stories are fascinating, but why be upset that there's no money for traveling now? You can watch all that stuff on TV." Then, when Alex showed Jessica the world, she realized what Grandma meant. It was a pity that she couldn't share her impressions with her family. Alex is the best gift that fate has given Jessica. He literally changed the life and outlook of a woman. Next to her spouse, she always felt peaceful. They have been together for so many years, and nothing has changed all the same tenderness, admiration. Both have become each other quite dear. The household has not bogged them down, as many warned. Alex still looks at his wife with love, still tries to surprise and delight her. The prophecies of acquaintances about the futility of this relationship did not come true, including the predictions of Camilla. Or did they? Could this be the moment Jessica recognizes her husband from a different perspective? Why is he out on the street at this hour? Alex should be at home looking after their sick son. What's he doing here? Probably rushing to meet that blonde hottie of his Camilla told me about. Now Bridget was going to find out. Her heart pounded, starting to give her a headache. Jessica was used to trusting her husband with everything. And now, following him through the streets of the city, she felt a mixture of the most contradictory feelings: anxiety, excitement, shame, guilt all at once. Jessica didn't understand what her husband Alex was doing in the city center right now, but she knew one thing: he should be at home at this moment looking after little Carl. One of the twins was sick and didn't go to daycare today. Jessica couldn't take a sick day. She was busy at work, with reports and an inspection. But Alex could work remotely from home today, which in fact the man was supposed to do now, to work and look after his son at the same time. But for some reason he is here, hurrying down the wide street somewhere, and Jessica follows him to uncover his secret at last. If it was something work-related, Alex would definitely call me, warn me, and tell me, she pondered. Who did he leave Carl for? The baby is only 3. He can't be home alone yet. Besides, he's had a high fever since this morning. No, Alex is a sensitive and caring father. He adores his children and would never leave any of them in danger. Surely someone is with Carl right now, a nanny or grandmother, Alex's mother. But why doesn't Jessica know about this? And why was Alex suddenly here, in the center of town? His company's office is about 10 kilometers away, and Alex looks kind of weird. The man always goes to work in trousers and a shirt. There is a strict dress code. Now Alex was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Jessica couldn't remember these things in her husband's wardrobe. Either something new or on the contrary old and therefore long forgotten clothes. Strange, of course. Alex never liked jeans and t-shirts. He preferred other, not brightly colored things. Right now he was wearing an orange polo. It was even more confusing. Jessica followed her husband's footsteps, noting more and more strange details, tattered trainers of an unknown brand. Strange, her husband Alex favored name brands. Not out of snobbery. No, that was not in the man's character at all. Despite his high earnings and brilliant career, just branded quality things were more comfortable for him. Where did he get those sneakers from the market? And in general, Alex looked different, a different look. Light stubble on his usually smoothly shaven face and tiredness. But of course it was Alex's push. Jessica would have recognized her husband in any image: the easy gait, the beautiful swarthy skin tone, the bright turquoise eyes that had once turned her head. She still admired them often. Alex kept walking forward, Jessica behind him. Why was he traveling on foot? His husband usually traveled by car. He wasn't particularly fond of walking. Jessica was already late for work. She'd left the office at lunchtime to get something to eat. Suddenly noticed her husband and, of course, hurried after him. It's no big deal, she thought. I've warned Camila. I'll think of something to say to my superiors. It's not the first time friends help each other out. Camila will cover. There's nothing to worry about. Finally, Alex turned into one of the restaurants, which were plentiful on both sides of the main street. Jessica froze. In her head again and again Camila's words that she had seen her husband in a cafe with a beautiful blonde. A friend, a colleague, had told her about it just the other day. Jessica then was sure that Camila was mistaken. After all, she at one time until the last did not believe that Jessica with Alex everything will work out. Her friend had repeatedly said that out loud. Camila's own experience showed that it was simply impossible. Alex was handsome, promising, wealthy, young and free. And she, Jessica, too, of course, beautiful. You can't argue with that. But she's still a different kind of bird. Jessica lives in a cramped one-room flat inherited from her grandmother. She works in a small firm as an economist for a pittance. And most importantly, she's raising her daughter alone. Who needs someone else's child? Does the prince need a woman with a burden? Camila questioned. So go for a walk. Meat will do. I wouldn't count on a serious relationship if I were you. Her colleague's words sounded quite logical and convincing. Indeed, why would Alex want someone else's child? And his parents would probably be against it. Jessica hadn't met her parents-in-law yet, and couldn't imagine how happy they would be for Jessica and her daughter Lillian. Still, meeting Bernard had a positive side. He'd given her a beautiful, healthy daughter. And then he was gone. Just vanished from Jessica's life. The commitment of family life was weighing on him. The bloke wasn't ready. Well, it's hard to blame him for that. It was Jessica's decision to keep the baby. And it wasn't an easy decision to make. Jessica still shuddered at the desperate situation she found herself in almost 13 years ago. She was just a few steps away from making the biggest mistake of her life. The logical and easier thing for her to do at that time was to have an abortion. It's a blessing that a very young Jessica didn't. Lillian is now 12 years old. Tall, slim, big-eyed. She looked like Bernard, but no one was upset about it. Bernard was a real beauty, dark skin, almond-shaped eyes, shiny black hair. He had a touch of oriental blood in him, high cheekbones, well-defined lips. All this was passed on to Lillian. She was already a teenager, a young girl. When Jessica went out with her daughter, she often caught glances from boys and even older boys. Just a little more, and her daughter would blossom into a beautiful girl. The thought that she might not be there at all sometimes sent shivers down Jessica's spine. When her grandmother died, Jessica was left all alone. Jessica had been an adult for a long time, 20 years old, after all. But in fact, the girl felt almost a child. Her grandmother always took care of her, cooked delicious dishes for her granddaughter, calmed her down, even woke them up in the mornings at the university. She surrounded Jessica with care and love, like a warm, cozy blanket. And now the girl was unbearably cold, homesick, and scared. Jessica missed her grandmother desperately. She cried a lot during that difficult period. In public, of course, kept to herself, but at home she gave vent to her feelings, sobbing, wailing, pouring out her grief. The realization that she was all alone frightened, and even panicked her. How can you live in the world if no one wants you or cares about you? Jessica needed a shoulder to lean on, a friend, a loved one. And that's when she met Bernard. The dark-haired, good-looking guy worked part-time as a janitor on her property. Always cheerful and smiling, energetic and agile, a total positive. Jessica noticed, of course, that the young janitor looked back at her when she came home from the steam. But guys like that, they probably don't miss a skirt at all. After a while, Bernard began to greet Jessica and smile broadly at her. The girl could not remain sad, and sad at such moments Bernard smiled too infectiously. No one could resist. Somewhat imperceptibly, the girl developed a liking for this guy. Their relationship had grown to the point where they sometimes talked about things around the house. Now, Jessica knew that Bernard came here from the village. His family was there. He served in the army, went to college, but he didn't have enough money. His parents were poor, to put it mildly. So he works part-time. Bernard also knew a lot about Jessica, for example, that she lived all alone and studied at a prestigious university in economics. One day, Bernard asked Jessica out on a date. The girl was taken aback by such an offer. Bernard was clearly very embarrassed, blushing, stammering, looking under his feet. It was not at all like the conversation of a cheerful young man, and so it looked especially sweet and touching. Of course, Jessica agreed. Bernard had no money, so the young people went to the seafront. They walked, talked, held hands, then kissed. Jessica felt more and more attracted to Bernard. He was so nice, so interesting. He'd just turned 22, but he'd seen and learnt more in his years than Jessica had ever dreamed of. Her life was relatively calm and prosperous, while Bernard had to work from the age of 11 to help his family, go through the army, get into serious trouble and get out of it. Bernard's life was a constant adventure. At home at the entrance, the girl suddenly realized that she did not want to part with him at all, but she didn't dare to invite him back to her place. Then she didn't dare. Later, Bernard did move in with her, and Jessica was happy with him for a long time, almost 2 years. Bernard masterfully fried potatoes and eggs, cleaned the flat in a flash. All this guy did much better than Jessica, whom her grandmother raised like a princess, protecting and pitying. He also knew how to fix taps and repair furniture. Life had taught him all that. Most of Jessica's time was taken up with her studies. Bernard was not particularly in need of science. He was listed in the construction school, but almost never appeared there, preferring to earn money. But that wasn't so good either. Casual earnings, part-time janitor's salary, and Jessica's social scholarship, that's all the components of the budget. I had to cut back on everything. It was a little frustrating for the guy, as he wanted a beautiful life. But Jessica was happy, as it was the main thing, was that there was a loving person around. Bernard was so sensitive, so understanding. He always knew when Jessica needed support and provided it. The guy was never stingy with words and generously bestowed the girl with compliments that made her melt. Bernard often went out with his friends without Jessica, and she didn't seem to mind. She had no time to go out anyway, because she had a lot of projects to do at school. Sometimes, though, Jessica was jealous when she saw Bernard going out with his friends. What if there are other girls there? Bernard is so handsome, so outgoing. Who could resist him? But the guy assured that he does not notice anyone but Jessica, and he does not need anyone at all. He's happy as he is. It's just friends, guys, sit around, talk. It's like a holiday for us guys, you know. Jessica nodded, but still stayed home with a restless heart. Her intuition told her that not everything was as smooth as Bernard said. but the girl consciously silenced that weak inner voice. 2 years flew by like a day. Jessica was already in her final year. Bernard was also finishing his technical school. Soon they would both be professionals, they would be able to get jobs, and then, finally, there would be no need to save money on the essentials. Maybe they could even go to the seaside. That would be marvelous. One February morning, Jessica realized she was expecting a baby. Of course, she and Bernard hadn't planned any children yet. Why should they? They were still on their own 2 feet, barely scraping by. But an unplanned pregnancy isn't an isolated incident. It happens all the time. Jessica's not the first, and she won't be the last. People manage somehow. And yet the girl was scared. She even had sweat on her back as she looked at the 2-stripe test she'd taken to know for sure. How will Bernard react? He'll probably freak out at first too. But he's such an all-rounder, such an experienced bloke, he certainly won't be confused. He'll say it'll be all right. We'll support. As always, we'll smile his trademark smile, and Jessica will immediately feel calm. Except Bernard's reaction was quite different. A baby? The guy even staggered away from Jessica upon hearing the news. What baby? Are you sure? I'm sure 2 tests came back positive. Jessica nodded. Of course, she understood everything perfectly well. But what could she do if this little man was already living under her heart? The girl felt disappointment and resentment. It seemed to her that Bernard's reaction would be quite different. You have to get money to live on somewhere, the boy said, as if he were talking to himself. Should I borrow it from Andrew? Jessica was startled when she heard the dreaded word. What are you talking about? The girl instinctively grabbed her still completely flat stomach as if to protect it. This was something she had never even thought about. Jesse Bernard pulled himself together and spoke in a gentle but firm voice. You realize we're in no position to be parents right now. What can we give to this baby? What are we doing on our own? We're almost done with our degrees. I could go to work on a construction site. You'll get maternity pay. We'll be fine. Jessica thought it was Bernard who was going to comfort her and say those words. But as it happened, she had to take the initiative. The news of the baby had knocked Bernard out of his depth. Of course, he would be ashamed of his cowardice later, but Jessica never reproached him for those phrases, though it was certainly very hurtful to hear. Bernard had convinced Jessica over and over again that they could not keep the baby. He painted depressing pictures of the future. He said he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. And at some point, the girl gave in to his persuasion. He's right about everything. They have no money, they haven't even got a job yet. They're cramped in a small 1-bedroom, and there's a baby. The baby needs a lot of money, nappies, medication, clothes, which babies grow out of at breakneck speed. Jessica will not be able to work for a long time when the child grows up and goes to kindergarten. No one will want such a specialist without experience. Jessica went to the hospital with a heavy heart. In her bag, she had all the necessary things she had been told to take with her: slippers, dressing gown, nappies. Jessica would have to spend the whole day in the hospital. She would not be allowed to go home until the evening, and that was if everything was all right. There was a queue at the emergency room. Jessica sat on a couch in the corner and stared at people for nothing. She was trembling, and she could hardly contain herself. She wished Bernard were there to hold her hand, to stroke her back, to assure her that everything would be all right. But he was off on another part-time job. And rightly so, they need the money. Especially since this month they had to pay a large sum for this very procedure. Next to Jessica sat a woman in her 40s, well-groomed, beautiful, expensively and tastefully dressed. Exquisite manicure, fashionable haircut. Jessica thought she'd like to look like that in 20 years. Except this woman's eyes were very sad. A man approached the woman, probably her husband. You could tell they were a wealthy couple. I've done the paperwork. You'll be called soon." He put his hand on his companion's shoulder. "Everything will be fine." For some reason, Jessica immediately thought that this woman also wanted to get rid of an unwanted pregnancy. Her spouse spoke the same words as Bernard. "It's going to be okay. Calm down, really. Why would they, people their age, need a baby? An accidental pregnancy, I suppose. What could be good?" Jessica's neighbor looked up at her husband. "What could be good about this whole situation? 11 IVF protocols, 5 frozen pregnancies. Again, those painful procedures, treatment, recovery, and then on again." You could see that the woman was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. In her companion's eyes, there was so much pain, so much sympathy. He did not know how to help his wife and what to say to her words. So he just hugged her. "How stupid I was," almost whispered the woman. "I was afraid then that I could not cope. I was just finishing school, ahead of the university career. My son would be 24 years old now. I knew it was a boy. I felt it right away. And now I'm paying for that mistake all my life. Serves me right. I'm right not to have any more children. It's a punishment." The man continued to comfort his wife in silence, stroking her back, her hair, squeezing her palms in his hands. He couldn't seem to find the right words. Jessica looked at the adult couple, eyes wide. She understood everything from their brief dialogue. Long ago, when she was a high school student, this woman had an abortion, and now, because of its consequences, she could not have children. She is tormented, worried, spends a lot of money, a lot of time to realize her dream of motherhood. But it doesn't work. Jessica suddenly realizes that she will never get rid of her baby boy. She already loves it, even though it's still just a cluster of cells. That's what Bernard called their baby when he insisted on terminating the pregnancy. Jessica is all grown up now. She's almost finished university, just a little bit away from graduating, with her degree in her pocket and Bernard by her side. Jessica's not alone. Together they'll make it. The girl ran out of the clinic as if chased by a pack of dogs. People looked at her in surprise. Once outside, Jessica breathed a sigh of relief. She felt as if she had just escaped a major disaster. Jessica put her hand on her stomach and smiled. Her baby was with her, and that girl. In that moment, Jessica clearly realized that what she had under her heart was not just a cluster of cells, but her daughter loved, beautiful, healthy. They would meet in 7 months. Bernard appeared unfazed by Jessica's story. "But it's not serious at all," he said. "I'll take you to the clinic tomorrow. You shouldn't have gone." It was the first time they had fought. Jessica insisted. Bernard argued that she was wrong. His arguments had seemed so logical and right before. Now Jessica wondered how she had ever agreed with them. "Yes, it will be hard for a while," she said. "But we're both very mature. We can handle it. I can't take that step." Finally, Bernard slammed the door and walked straight out into the dark March evening. Jessica thought he'd cool down, come back to apologize. After all, Bernard had always understood her so well before. The same would happen now. But Bernard didn't turn up until the morning. Drunk, aggressive, he again insisted that the child must be disposed of. "I have the right to decide this too, and it concerns me." It was now impossible to change Jessica's mind, and the boy quickly realized this. He was a good judge of people in general. They hardly spoke to each other during this period. Jessica asked the guy some questions, but he didn't dignify her with answers. He only came home for the night, and not always. Jessica hoped that time would pass and the man she loved would get used to the idea that he would soon become a father. Everything would be all right. They had such a warm and close relationship. Of course, they'll reconcile sooner or later. Bernard will realize everything. He'll be ashamed. But one day, coming home from university, Jessica found that Bernard's things were gone. as well as Bernard himself. Jessica realized at once. She had hoped in vain that the boy would support her. She'd been wrong to think that he just needed time to get used to the situation. Bernard wasn't going to take responsibility for the baby. And he wasn't likely to love her, Jessica, that much. Not at the time. Much later, the girl suddenly realized that Bernard was using her, living in her flat. Renting in their town wasn't cheap. Bernard's earnings were clearly not enough for such an expensive pleasure. Besides, Jessica took care of him, cooked for him, washed and ironed his clothes, cleaned. Bernard lived on his own. At first, he amazed Jessica with his culinary talents and housekeeping, but then constant fatigue from supposedly hard work, things at the technical school and outings with friends. Somehow Jessica took the whole household on her shoulders. She was happy that she was doing something for the person she loved. And yet Jessica tried to find him. How could it be? Gone. Vanished. Didn't even say goodbye. That's not right. Anyway, the baby I'm carrying under my heart, his baby, who needs a father. But it turned out that Bernard had been expelled from the technical school almost 2.5 years ago. That's the news the girl gasped. So, under the pretext of studying, Bernard was spending time somewhere unknown. Wow, what a masterful deceiver he is. He told me so convincingly that he was going to his classes, while he himself. A bloke from the technical school, when he heard Jessica was going to find out about Bernard, came to her. "Are you looking for Bernard?" he asked. Jessica nodded. "Well, that's what I thought. It's a rare name. I don't think we've had many Bernards go to school here. Tell me what happened." He was head over heels in love. Then he borrowed a good sum of money and ran away. No, the shocked girl shook her head. He just disappeared. We lived together for almost 2 years. Everything was fine. "Lived in your flat. Probably at your expense," the guy chuckled. Jessica suddenly realized that the guy was right. Bernard earned, of course, from time to time, but he spent his money mostly on himself. Stylish clothes, gadgets. Jessica was bought occasionally inexpensive flowers or fruit baskets. The girl was so happy with this attention and so happy to have her favorite person around her that she just didn't notice the obvious. "The fellow's right," she murmured thoughtfully. "Indeed, Bernard has been living off me. If you look at the situation soberly." "Something like that, but not quite," Jessica countered. "Really, not quite. Bernard sometimes cooked nice dinners, fixed things around the house, always wondered how you were doing. If you put it that way, he gave something too, not just took." "Not exactly," the boy murmured thoughtfully. "Well, anyway, be glad he's out of your life. He's an opportunist. A clinging fish. A beggar from the village, unwilling to study and work, but dreaming of a beautiful life." From the outside, it was clearly visible how he tried to make friends with guys from wealthy families and daughters of wealthy parents in order to pull resources from them. At first, he still succeeded, but then everyone in the technical school realized who he was, and his tricks did not pass here anymore. But there are plenty of majors outside the college, so Bernard went hunting elsewhere. He was expelled from here for failing in his studies. Jessica flapped her eyes, trying to digest what she'd heard. "But I'm not the daughter of rich parents," she said. "Quite the opposite. I have a flat, a steady source of income." Jessica thought and nodded. "Well, I'm sorry, but it's written all over your face that you're naive and inexperienced. It's easy to fool a girl like that. Bernard didn't have a place to live. That's why he picked on you. He's been living in a safe haven for a while, never mind not being able to pay the rent. I'm sure all this time he was still on the hunt." Jessica thought for a moment. Yes, indeed, Bernard was often disappearing with some friends of his that the girl knew nothing at all about. Perhaps the bloke was right, and now he'd probably found someone more suitable. So he's gone and left her. You should be glad that Sponger's gone. And if he ever shows up after another failure, chase him away. Don't even let him on your doorstep. That's my advice to you, said the boy. Jessica didn't believe the guy, because it was very hard to realize that the person you were so in love with wasn't who he said he was. Overcoming her natural shyness, Jessica interviewed a few more people. She chose the older ones, seniors, almost graduates. And yes, some of them remembered Bernard. They spoke of the young man in much the same way the first guy had. Jessica returned home feeling upset, as if the ground had been knocked out from under her feet. Jessica had had a different picture in her head for 2 years, beautiful, bright, right? But it turns out Bernard was using her. When he found out Jessica was pregnant, the cunning chap realized what this was all about. Liability, child support, a screaming baby, and a tiny one-bedroom, problems for life. Or at least for the first 18 years after the baby is born. Too expensive a price to pay for free housing and not so luxurious munchies. So he ran away. He's probably out of town too. No one's keeping Bernard here. Then Jessica thought about the baby, how she'd raise it. Would she be able to handle it? Would she be able to pull it off? She couldn't know that. But she realized one thing: even though her situation was desperate, this child would still be born to Jessica. There wasn't a soulmate in the world. And here was a daughter. Jessica felt she was going to have a girl. Together they would cope with all the troubles of life. And then there was a difficult, very difficult period. Diploma, the last responsible session, state exams. Jessica studied like a curse from morning till night. Jessica didn't think about Bernard anymore. She just didn't have time. And then the toxicosis hit. Jessica was nauseous and nauseous. She felt dizzy all the time. But no one had canceled her exams, and no one was going to make any favors for a pregnant student. Jessica knew one thing: she had to get that diploma. She couldn't leave everything at the finish line, even though it was very hard to study in such a state. Jessica was happy about one thing: in the antenatal clinic, where Jessica registered for pregnancy. She was told at every appointment that everything was going according to plan. The baby was healthy. It was developing as it should. These words of doctors encouraged the girl and warmed her soul. A few months flew by unnoticeably. The diploma is over. The state exams have been passed with honors. Jessica is happy and proud of herself. She's done it. But what's next? The pregnancy was well past the first half. The belly was still barely visible, just a slight hint. But no one around her had any idea that Jessica was expecting a baby. After defending her diploma, the dean unexpectedly invited the successful student to his office. Jessica was a little surprised by this, went up to the first floor and knocked gently on the door of the dean's office. "Come in," she heard. Jessica saw Jeffrey behind the desk, always stern and serious. He was smiling broadly now, a cheerful sparkle in his eyes. "You're a great student," he began the conversation. "Your grades have been good all year, and you did well on your final exams. That's why I recommended you to the plant recruiters. They're in need of bright young economists. You know how much they pay." Of course Jessica knew. She never dreamed of ever getting a job there. Those who worked at the factory lived in huge new flats and houses and drove expensive cars. In their town, the phrase factory worker even became a household name. It denoted wealthy people who could deny themselves nothing. Jessica was even a little dizzy from these upcoming prospects. But then a new life stirred in the girl's belly, bringing her mother back to earth. Who needs an employee with no experience, who in a couple of months will go on maternity leave? It's not hard to hide a pregnancy now. You can hardly see your stomach, so it's not a problem. But you'd still have to come clean and face a lot of accusations and let people down. Jessica wasn't capable of that. When she realized that the job was slipping through her fingers, she almost cried. This job could solve all her problems at once. Jessica really wanted to work, to plunge into practice. That was fate. "Jeffrey, there's something I have to tell you about this offer." Jessica still had a faint hope that everything would work out. The dean was going to say that pregnancy was no big deal. You'll work for a couple of months, go on maternity leave, and then return to the factory. Such a promising economist will wait. But the man, having heard the graduate's confession, exclaimed, puzzled. But how so? Is it a long term or what? Just such offers happen once in a lifetime. It's a shame to miss the chance. Jessica, you're a good economist, you'll make a great specialist, and I can see you need the money. I know your story. That's why I decided to help. Jessica shook her head negatively. She understood everything the dean was saying, but there was nothing she could do about it. And she would never get rid of the baby, even if she hadn't missed the deadline yet. The girl walked home and sobbed to her heart's content, ignoring the passers-by looking back at her. It was better that the offer had never happened. Such prospects, a completely different life. It was hard to turn down a place like this. But Jessica didn't want to cheat, and she couldn't let people down. It wasn't in her nature. Besides, Jeffrey said that she wouldn't have been able to do it, because when hiring employees of the plant undergo a medical examination. So as it happened, it happened. At home, Jessica calmed down, pulled herself together. She's having a baby. She needs to be strong. In addition, before the birth of a daughter, it is necessary to solve a lot of issues. The first financial difficulties were not far off. Now Jessica will not receive a scholarship. She will not be taken to work, either a girl who is about to go on maternity leave. But it's a job in her specialty. And there are other jobs. They do not require high qualifications, and sometimes even official registration. They don't pay much. But Jessica needs something to live on. Not only just to live, she will have to save some amount of money not to work during the period when her daughter will be a baby. Yes, the state provides some allowances for children, but Jessica has already learnt that they are paltry sums. You can't live on that. So Jessica, an excellent student, went to work as a cleaner of entrances in the same homeowners association in which Bernard had once worked as a janitor. The girl cleaned the stairwells in the early morning and late evening, when there were not so many people. The pay was good. By Jessica's standards, she had enough to live on and managed to save a little. Of course, she didn't get rich, but after her grandmother was gone, she was used to saving money, so she didn't worry, especially about that. Physical labor suddenly turned out to be the best sedative. Heavy and sad thoughts were somehow washed out of her head. Jessica even felt joy when, instead of a busy staircase, she saw a shining clean platform in front of her eyes. There was something soothing, even peaceful about it. At the same time, the girl was looking for earnings on the internet. She realized that she would not be able to wield a rag for long. The belly was growing by the day, and by the hour, it was simply impossible to hide it. And of course, it prevented her from bending over and stretching properly. And it was dangerous to carry buckets of water, just in case. And Jessica found another way to earn money, even more successful than the last one. And most importantly, a small child was not a hindrance. It turned out that hundreds of thousands of students across the country do not want to write their own term papers and essays. Downloading ready-made papers is not an option. Teachers have long known them by heart. Yes, and online verification greatly complicates the situation. So there was a demand for people who can write such works for money. And Jessica could do it, and she could do it. She even breathed a sigh of relief when she realized that her university knowledge would help her in such a difficult situation. Jessica quit her job at the homeowners association because she couldn't clean the entrances anymore, and delved into a new job that she really liked. The girl was afraid that during her maternity leave her knowledge would be forgotten, outdated, erased. But now she would be aware of everything that was happening in the economy. Jessica worked and felt how she was pumping her professionalism. This, of course, could not help but please. The girl managed to save enough money to prepare everything necessary for her baby girl nappies. Nappies for the first time, bottles, overalls, raspipens, bathtub. It turned out that the little man needs so much. Jessica even bought a pram. Not a new one, of course, new ones were very expensive. She took a hand on the announcement of a wonderful transport for the princess, a soft pink pram with beautiful flowers on the side. In excellent, by the way, in excellent condition. In due time, little Lillian was born. When the baby was placed on Jessica's chest in the delivery room, the young mum even cried from the accumulated emotions. Now she is not alone. Now she is a mum. It is, of course, very difficult and responsible. But what a joy. The days in the maternity hospital with her little daughter turned out to be an incredibly happy time. Jessica didn't have to work, didn't have to clean or cook. She was invited to the canteen 5 times a day and was provided with clean nappies for her daughter every day. Beauty. Sometimes the girl looked out of the window at the festive discharges arranged for new mums by relatives, balloons, laughter, songs, fun, crowds of relatives and friends. All of them joyfully welcomed the new member of the family, showered mum with flowers. Jessica smiled as she watched these scenes of solemn discharges. But she was sad too, of course. No one was expecting her like this. Lillian was the only one who was excited about Lillian's arrival. But suddenly Jessica was wrong. When the girl with a tight bundle in her arms went to the porch of the maternity hospital, a small crowd was waiting for her. There were a couple of classmates, a few colleagues from the homeowners association. They were all smiling. There were flowers and balloons too. Jessica almost cried with excitement. The girl was put into a taxi and sent home. Her friends accompanied her to the flat. Someone had to carry balloons, flowers, and packages with gifts for the baby. So Jessica had a solemn discharge. And then began the everyday life of a young mother. Jessica got used to her new role not as easily as she had planned before giving birth. Sleepless nights, inexperience, unpredictable behavior of her daughter, and fears. With the arrival of the baby, Jessica had new fears that she could not even think of before. What if Lillian chokes while feeding? What if the rash on the baby's body is a symptom of a terrible disease? Why is her daughter crying so much? Maybe she needs medical attention. Jessica also had to work because her child support was so low. There were times when the young mom had to cradle her daughter with one hand and write another term paper with the other, because the deadline was looming. Jessica slept very little during this difficult period. There was absolutely nowhere to wait for help. That's why she had to deal with the child herself, and work, and keep the house clean. After all, it was still necessary to go to the clinic and walk with the baby every day. Jessica lost a lot of weight. She had deep shadows under her eyes at that time. She sometimes didn't even have time to clean herself up for the day. In the morning, she would twist her long, disheveled hair into a bun at the back of her head, hoping to make it up later. But she remembered to do it after midnight. And yet, despite all these difficulties, Jessica never once regretted her decision to keep the baby. Jessica, on the contrary, looking at her daughter Lillian, sometimes horrified at what she could do. After all, she had already come to the clinic, she had already taken the cue, she had already decided on a terrible deed. She wondered what would have happened if she hadn't heard that woman's conversation with her husband. She never had such thoughts again. Now she didn't even want to think about it. Lillian grew up a calm, trouble-free child. She had everything on time. Her teeth grew in when she needed them, and she sat up as planned. And she started school early. Jessica had no one to have a word with at home. She missed human contact, so she was always talking to her daughter. Perhaps it was because of this that Lillian spoke at an age when other children don't even try to say their first words yet. The mums on the playground, looking at the sensible, pretty little girl, were amazed. And Jessica's heart was overflowing with joy and maternal pride. She has a wonderful daughter, the best happiness that she has. At the age of 2, Lillian went to kindergarten. By the way, the girl quickly got used to the new place without tears and tantrums, as if she understood that there was no other way out and did not create unnecessary problems for her mother. Lillian was not even sick during the adaptation period, like other children. Having realized that her daughter was adjusted, Jessica started looking for a job in her specialty. Earnings on the internet, this of course is good, but still the money is small and unstable. The young mother had to save on everything, and so wanted to buy toys and beautiful dresses for her daughter, and sometimes pamper herself. It was not for nothing that Jessica studied for 5 years. It was time to look for a job in her specialty. No more red diploma on the shelf to dust. Of course, Jessica faced difficulties. An employee with no experience, and even with a small child in her arms, did not want to take. Now endless sick days will begin. We know you, young mums, but Jessica parried, my daughter attends the garden for a long time and does not get sick. There's no problem with that. Jessica heard the same thing in every interview. You all say that, but you're not the right person for us. We need someone with experience. You can't do it. Jessica went to interviews like she was going to work, and was met with the same rejections everywhere. It baffled her. Where am I supposed to get experience if they won't hire me without it? She once asked a recruiter bluntly. The woman was confused for the first few seconds. That's not my problem. And yet one day luck smiled on the girl. The furniture repair company urgently needed an economist. Salary offered low, so the queue of applicants for this position was not lined up, and the person was needed right now. So Jessica was hired. Despite her lack of experience and the presence of a small child, it was not up to such subtleties. Jessica quickly proved herself. She did her work diligently, had time for everything, and also gave her ideas on how to improve accounting. The girl finally got to work in her specialty. The management, of course, quickly appreciated her zeal. The young employee was respected and her salary was even raised. We need such enthusiasts, the boss often said. These praises gave Jessica a pleasant warmth in her soul. A bonus to her favorite job and a good salary was communication with a team of adults. How much the girl missed it all. For 2 years she talked only with her little daughter Lillian. And hear jokes, joint tea parties, exchange of news and opinions. Jessica missed it all. In the same firm she met Camilla. They were almost the same age and therefore became fast friends. Camilla often came to visit Jessica and invited her to stay with her. The girl was still living with her parents, so they had a lot of common topics for conversation. True, the opinions of friends on some issues differed, because of which sometimes there were heated arguments. But it was also very interesting and exciting. Life had settled down. Jessica was working, getting good money. Now she didn't have to skimp on food and clothes. Jessica even managed to save up for a summer trip to the sea with Lillian. Luckily for the young mother, Camilla volunteered to go with them. It was a wonderful holiday, which was repeated several times afterwards. Lillian was a joy to behold. She grew up a beautiful girl, very similar to Bernard, but the character and learning abilities of the girl went to her mother. Lillian quickly and effortlessly learned to read, write, and count before school. In kindergarten, she always went with a book. She also drew beautifully. Jessica couldn't get enough of her treasure. But Camilla's personal life was not going well at all. She often went on dates, had easy romances, and then shared with her friend over a glass of wine another disappointment. Maybe I don't need them, these men? Maybe they are all really arseholes. Yours left you with the baby and ran away. I don't know what to say. Jessica shook her head. You know, I don't have much experience with these things. Maybe you're right. But Jessica didn't really think so. She knew there were many wonderful men in the world, kind, brave, caring. She just didn't want to argue with Camilla, who was already upset. Of course, Jessica sometimes thought about the fact that she needed her own man, a reliable support, a wall behind which you can hide from the hardships of life, because pulling everything alone is very hard. There is no one to share her worries with. She herself would be happy to take care of this man, would surround him with love and care. And Lillian would have a father who would walk with her on the street and carry the girl on his shoulders. Risks were in short supply. Jessica, after all, saw with what eyes her daughter saw of the father-little-daughter couples. She didn't say anything out loud. She didn't want to upset her mom. But Jessica had noticed it all herself. But where to find him, such a prince? And when homework, daughter. Jessica didn't go out much. Sometimes, of course, Camila took her out to a bar or a cafe. Lillian was old enough to spend a few hours alone. But still, the woman's heart wasn't in the right place during that time. She kept thinking about how her baby was doing. She couldn't relax. "Why are you spinning like a frying pan?" Camila was angry. "Look at the cool guys at the next table looking at us. They're about to meet us." "You know, I should probably get going," Jessica replied. "You always do." Camila shook her head resentfully. "Just when something interesting starts, you run right away." Camila could not fully understand her friend. She herself had not had children yet. She had no idea what it was like to worry about her child. And she didn't know about the worries associated with a child either. By the way, Camila is still single. She has occasional stormy romances, but they all end the same way. The woman is again disappointed in the next beau, or he himself, without explanation, disappears over the horizon. When Alex appeared in Jessica's life, she initially did not even want to talk about it to her friend. She had just gone through a difficult breakup and was in upset feelings. And here was Jessica and her happiness. And the perceptive Camila figured it all out. "Are you seeing someone?" "Well, sort of." "How did you know?" "Your eyes gave you away." Camila grinned. "Come on, spit it out already. Who is he? How did you meet him?" Jessica had to tell her friend then. She didn't mind, though. She wanted to share the story with her friend. Especially since the story really did seem like a fairy tale. Jessica always came home at the same time. She would drive from work to school and pick up Lillian from after-school care. Together they would go shopping and then slowly and hurriedly walk back to their house. Mother and daughter shared the news of the day, discussed plans for the evening. It was a wonderful time. That May evening. At first it was business as usual. Lillian was in a happy frame of mind. A long holiday, a school camp, and a present from her mother for the excellent completion of the first grade. The girl walked beside Jessica, and Jessica smiled, bouncing with the feelings that overwhelmed her. She didn't think to pull her daughter back. Let her have her own fun. And then a man approached them, handsome, young. Expensive brand name clothes gave away his social status. He was looking straight at Jessica and approaching her. There could be no doubt. "Hello, a little embarrassed," said the young man. "You just don't freak out. I just have no idea how to start a conversation. We need to talk." "At least I certainly do." Jessica looked dumbfounded. Lillian looked at the stranger curiously, but without fear. The woman thought she was setting a bad example for her daughter. She had taught her so many times not to talk to strangers, and here she was. But on the other hand, there was nothing to be afraid of. A busy street, crowds of people going about their business. They're certainly not in any danger here. And this stranger evokes feelings other than fear or dislike. He's clearly embarrassed, though usually he's probably confident and self-sufficient. This behavior looks nice enough, and in general an open look, a beautiful smile, a calm voice. Jessica suddenly realized that all this attracted her to the stranger. "This is a man you want to listen to." "Shall we go to a cafe?" the man suggested. "I think the girl could use some ice cream." "I wouldn't say no." Lillian smiled at him. "No, that's unnecessary." Jessica shook her head, realizing the man didn't know how to speak in front of a child. The woman sent Lillian away to the nearest playground. Jessica could see exactly what her daughter was doing. The girl was also glancing at her mother, but she couldn't hear her conversation with the stranger now. "So what did you want to talk about?" Jessica asked. The young man introduced himself as Alex and then told her what the matter was. As he narrated, Jessica was surprised, delighted, and tried to hide a happy smile. She felt like the heroine of a romantic comedy. It turns out that Alex dines in this cafe every night after work, and the walls there are transparent, made of thick tempered glass. The man, understandably enough, is looking at the street during dinner. His field of vision includes people hurrying about their business in the evening. Then one day he sees Jessica and her daughter. The easy gait, the kind look in your eyes. You looked at your daughter with such tenderness and looked, well, like Madonna and Child from ancient paintings. I don't know how to explain. Alex was embarrassed and confused. But Jessica certainly understood what the man was trying to say. "Don't think anything of the sort, it's just, I understand you're single now, and we could try to meet up sometime. Go for a walk somewhere to socialize. I'm raising my daughter alone. That's true. But how did you figure that out?" "Just surmised." Alex smiled broadly. It was obvious that Jessica's admission that she was single pleased him greatly. "No ring on my finger. Besides, I've never once seen you with anyone. Just you and your daughter. I've been watching you for a while now, haven't I?" "That sounds frightening," Jessica assured the man. Her heart fluttered with joy. Goosebumps were running up and down her back in droves. The woman tried very hard not to show her feelings and hoped she was succeeding. "Do you live here?" "Lillian and I pass by at this time every day. No wonder you see us all the time." Alex smiled again. "Yes, you're right. That's exactly how it worked out. When I see you, I feel so happy, so warm at heart. Well, now I said it out loud. That's why I decided to talk to you. I think you're a wonderful person. Not many people like you. And of course, you're very beautiful." Jessica couldn't help smiling. It had been so long since she had been complimented. It had been so long since she had felt delightful and loved. To see the interest in this man's eyes, to feel his sympathy, it was incredibly satisfying. Then the conversation flowed more easily, more naturally. Unnoticeably, Jessica and Alex switched to you. The man was no longer embarrassed or lost. He told a little about himself, asked Jessica a few questions about her life. The rapprochement happened naturally and easily. A little later, Lillian, who was playing on the court, joined them on the bench. She further lightened the mood with her childlike directness. Somehow it happened that Lillian and Alex immediately found a common language. And then there were meetings, dates, sometimes with Lillian, sometimes without her. Jessica was afraid to believe that she had finally met her man. Alex understood her, accepted and respected her opinion, and was always ready to offer help. Jessica felt that if she approached him with a problem, he would immediately solve it, and even happier that he could help. There were doubts, of course. The story of Bernard was still fresh in her mind, though it had been many years since then. Alex is younger. He has a high position in a big company. His parents are very wealthy, after all. Do they need a daughter-in-law like that? And Alex himself. The man is rich, handsome, virtually flawless. He must have a lot of admirers around him. And the man wasn't exactly hiding it. Of course, I've met many women, but you're different from all of them. You're the best. Sincere and honest, a little naive and gentle. There's probably no one like you anymore. I was lucky enough to meet you by chance. Jessica melted at those words. She already loved Alex with all her heart and felt that he had equally strong feelings for her. But Jessica still couldn't believe that a long and serious relationship between them was possible. People around them were adding fuel to the fire. Camila, the master of disappointing men, was especially trying. Those rich guys, they're always looking for the young and beautiful. I've had stories like that. Travis, for example, you remember him, probably a businessman with a cool car, singing "I love you, I can't" in his ears. and then he dumped her. Married his father's partner's daughter. The usual story. You also there especially do not hope, because then it hurts, prophesied Camila. But things didn't turn out the way she predicted. Alex proposed to Jessica. He looked into her eyes with such anxiety when she was confused by the surprise, wondering what to say. Alex had thought at the time that Jessica was formulating a polite refusal. He had admitted it to her himself later. But the woman just didn't know what to do, because she was confused and because she had it firmly planted in her head that they were not a couple. "I love you very much, you know," Jessica finally uttered. "But won't you regret it later? After all, we're far from being equals. And I have a daughter, you know." "You really think so?" Alex marveled. Then he pulled Jessica tightly against him. "I love you. I don't need anyone else. I'm happy I noticed you once. It's the greatest gift of fate." Jessica developed then from the joy and surprise of the touching situation. It felt good to feel so valued and loved. "Well, what about your parents? They won't mind, will they?" Only now Alex realized his omission, smiling. "I should have introduced you to them a long time ago. Then such questions wouldn't have arisen in principle." Alex's parents turned out to be incredibly nice and smiling people. They welcomed Jessica and Lillian so warmly that the woman had no doubts. Alex is not lying. He really wants to be her spouse. Everything will be fine with them. "Children are a great blessing," smiled Kimberly, Alex's mum, looking fondly at Lillian. "She's such a beauty. You have a very good girl." And Lillian reciprocated Alex's parents' affection. If Jessica at first was shy in the company of her mother-in-law, her 7-year-old daughter immediately found a common language with them. She needed her grandparents so much. And Kimberly and Jonathan had long dreamed of grandchildren. And then there was the wedding. Not a lavish gala with lots of guests, but a small family celebration. It was what both the bride and groom wanted. After the wedding, the newly married family Jessica, Alex and Lillian flew to the warm sea. It was a wonderful joint holiday full of sun, fun, pleasant surprises. And then family life began in Alex's large flat. Life somehow quickly settled down. Everything fell into place. After only a couple of months, Jessica felt like it had always been like that. 2 years after the wedding, the family was enriched with 2 new members. Jessica gave birth to twins. Carl and Michael were so funny, so cute. They quickly became everyone's favorite. Kimberly, Jessica's mother-in-law, loved fussing with the babies. The happy grandmother came to the flat of the young family almost every day at first to help her daughter-in-law. After all, 2 babies at once, this is no joke. Often she was accompanied by her husband, Jonathan. He also loved the children and always invented some fun games. When Grandpa came to visit, there was always squealing and laughter in the flat. Jessica enjoyed these visits. Alex turned out to be not only a wonderful husband, but also a caring father. And the man made no distinction between Lillian and his sons. He paid equal attention to all of them. When time passed, the boys grew up and went to kindergarten. Jessica was finally able to return to work. Of course, there was no need for money as before, but the woman loved what she was doing. Besides, she liked the team and socializing. She didn't want to become a housewife at all, although Alex had suggested it to her more than once. Jessica explained her decision to her husband, and he, as always, understood her. She and Alex have been together for 6 years now. These years have changed Jessica a lot. She became more calm, more feminine, more peaceful. How could she not be when she's with someone she never dreamed of? He's so unbelievably good at everything. But now Jessica suddenly runs through the streets of the city after her ideal husband, who apparently is in a hurry to meet his mistress. The woman did not believe Camila's words when she said that she had seen Alex several times in a cafe with a spectacular lady. Jessica felt sorry for her friend. She so desperately wanted what she had: a husband, children, a strong family. Jessica knew that Camila was a little jealous of her and thought that what she said about Alex was either made up or a mistake. But here he is, Alex. Strangely dressed, unshaven, some kind of very tired, going all out, whereas he should be at home with the baby at this time. Here, at last, is the restaurant. The man walked in there. Jessica waited a while to avoid bumping into her husband at the door, then slipped into the establishment as well. The woman chose a far corner table behind a palm tree tub. She could hardly be seen there. It's a cozy vantage point. But Alex, Jessica's husband, was seated at a table against the opposite wall, far enough away to not hear his conversation, but well enough to observe. And yes, Alex wasn't alone. Kimberly, the blonde girl Camila had mentioned, was already waiting for him at the table. She wasn't wrong, it turns out. Indeed, the girl is quite attractive, and so attentive looking at the man, so keen to tell him something. Alex answered one-word answers, looked at the interlocutor with interest, nodded in time with her words. His eyes remained somehow very anxious. Probably he was telling his mistress how he was fed up with life with his wife and 3 children. Maybe even complaining that he had to carry someone else's child. All complexes and stereotypes, once tortured, have long been hushed up, but suddenly they have risen again. Only heads were raised. Jessica was desperately jealous of Alex for this talkative beauty. And it also hurt. It hurt that those around her, including Camila, were right. A man like Alex would never be happy with a woman like her, Jessica. He needs someone brighter, more presentable, like this blonde. Alex suddenly lowered his head as if he heard something sad or frightening. The blonde put a hand on his shoulder. A gentle, soothing gesture. The man covered her palm with his. They smiled at each other. Jessica's eyes darkened with emotion. If before this conversation could be written off as a business conversation, now it couldn't be. Alex suddenly got up from his seat and moved towards the smoking room. That seemed strange, too. Alex had never smoked and generally kept to a healthy lifestyle. Jessica did not miss the opportunity to follow her husband. Now she would talk to him, ask about the blonde. Jessica does not intend to wait for the evening, and in such a situation, the man will be confused and will not be able to come up with an excuse or lie on the fly. The surprise effect. Seeing Jessica, Alex glanced at her indifferently at first. Something was wrong with him. Something subtly unfamiliar slid into the features of the man he loved. Was he so changed by the company of his mistress? And how can he remain so calm when he sees his wife at this very moment? Jessica fixed her gaze on the man. An angry look. Alex raised his eyebrows in surprise, looking at her face, and suddenly there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. It was as if he remembered Jessica and recognized her at last. The situation was becoming more and more incomprehensible. "Alex, can you explain to me what's going on here?" Jessica didn't expect her voice to shake as tears came to her eyes. "You must be Jessica," Alex smiled embarrassedly. Only now the woman noticed the deep old scar on the man's temple and the tattoo on his arm. Also, the man seemed to be thinner than Alex. "Who are you?" Jessica exhaled. She swayed and grabbed the ledge of the wall to keep from falling. The man immediately supported her with care. His movements, his facial expressions, his facial features, everything was exactly like Alex's. And yet it wasn't him. Now, finding herself very close to him, Jessica could see. It was perfectly clear. "It's probably for the best," the man smiled. "I didn't know how to tell you about myself, even though I found you almost a month ago. I've been living in your town all this time. Bridget and I. She's a private detective. By the way, she's the one who helped me with this search. She and I have been gathering evidence and proof. There's no doubt now. Now comes the hard part. Dating." "I don't understand anything," Jessica said. "It's not surprising. The story is so unique in its own way. Any Indian film could top it. I thought you were my husband." That's understandable. I mean, Alex and I are natural copies of each other. Twin clones. My husband is the only child in the family, Jessica objected weakly. If Kimberly and Jonathan had other children, they would have told me about it. You knew it had taken a long time for the elderly couple to become parents. Alex is a very late and long-awaited child, and he was born alone. I suggest we go to the table. Bridget and I will tell you all about it. Jessica nodded weakly. The blonde raised her eyebrows in surprise when she saw Jessica. But Bridget seemed to recognize her at least. She addressed Jessica by her first name. This is a truly incredible story, Bridget said. It will change your husband's life, and yours, of course. It was Bridget who started the story. A man who looked uncannily like Alex, whose name, as it turned out, was Travis, periodically interjected his lines, adding to it, correcting it. In faraway Florida lived a large family, mom, dad, and 4 children. The couple had no education, no parental support. All their property was a 2-room flat in a dilapidated 2-story barracks on the edge of town. It was a wooden building, shriveled by time, an emergency dwelling. But the large family had no other home in sight. There was a catastrophic lack of money. The head of the family worked part-time. Wherever he could, he would plow a vegetable garden, help someone to re-roof a roof, unload a lorry in a shop. In a word, a laborer. In the morning, he would go out in search of money, and in the evening he would return often drunk, but without money. The mother of the family almost never worked. She had no time. She was pregnant, or with another baby on her hands. It is a joke. For 6 years of life together, the couple managed to produce 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. It would seem quite enough, given the initial conditions, even overkill. But the mother of many children was of a different opinion. Firstly, the children were paid an allowance. Secondly, having a baby in her arms, you could legally not work. Her husband all dreamed that when the younger ones grow up, his wife will help him in making money for the family. But his other half had other plans. And in general, the woman loved children, especially when they are very young, touching, chubby as kittens, lumps that smell so nice. How could she deny herself this pleasure? In general, contrary to the expectations of the head of the family, my wife got pregnant. For the 5th time. She twisted her arm round my finger, saying something about safe days. Women can do it when they want to. The husband despaired when he learned he was about to become a father again. It was too much to wait for another one. And then there were suspicions that there was more than one child under his wife's heart. Something suspiciously fast-growing belly this time. The mother of many children did not go to ultrasound. There was no money, and she had not registered before. Only to fray her nerves, to go to the counseling center for nothing. No, the lady was already experienced. She knew that it is most convenient to surrender to doctors on the eve of childbirth, but experienced acquaintances unanimously assured twins. The old lady on the ground floor, a former midwife. It was 2 heads in the belly of the pregnant woman felt. Twins. I'm telling you for sure. The neighbor said authoritatively. I'm never wrong. The woman smiled happily, and her husband clutched his head. And twins, too. At that time, the father of many children found a good part-time job tending the bushes in the house of a wealthy businessman, Jonathan. He was famous in town. Every dog knew that he owned a chain of restaurants and cafes. The man was lucky enough to get a seasonal part-time job with him. Jonathan paid well, didn't take any offense. The work was not dusty, simple. And what a magnificent house. And the garden, it was a pleasure to work in it. People lived, but the rich couple didn't look happy. And the new gardener quickly found out the reason. It turns out that the couple could not become parents. It didn't work, that's all. Some kind of health problem for the wife. The father of many children then still grinned to himself. His wife would have such problems. The businessman took his wife everywhere. where she was not only treated, but the result nothing. And such things happen. One day the wife of the owner could not stand it and burst into tears right in the garden. Jonathan clumsily consoled her, trying to find words. It was then that the father of many children had the idea. He waited until Jonathan was alone and approached him with a proposal. "You can't have a baby. I've got 4 on the shop floor, and I've got twins on the way. Where can we put them? We can't afford them. So maybe we'll give you the kids at a fair price. My wife hasn't registered with the doctors, so the babies don't even exist on paper. What do you think?" Jonathan was outraged at first, shouted at the gardener. But a couple of days later, he called him in for a serious talk. It turned out that the businessman discussed the proposal with his wife, and she happily seized the opportunity to become a mother of newborn twins. That evening, the head of the family returned to his native Barak in high spirits. You bet he made such a deal and got rid of unnecessary children. And he'll make money. Besides, at least one of his descendants would live like a human being. The man even envied the unborn twins a little. Lucky kids, but his wife suddenly objected. "What do you mean? Give the children away. They are my relatives. I feel them. I'm already waiting for them. I won't give my kids to anyone. Let them take a child from an orphanage," the woman insisted. Children in orphanages are often from dysfunctional families with various health problems. Our babies will be born perfectly healthy. And then, just imagine what opportunities will open before them in such a rich home. And in an orphanage, they'll have a very different life. But my wife was stubborn. "No, I won't. I won't give up my children." The husband wasn't about to give up on his plan. He told Jonathan about the problem. He said his wife didn't want to part with any of the children. And then the businessman voiced a plan that could only be implemented by such an influential and rich man. When the time came for the young woman to give birth, 2 twin boys were born in the local maternity hospital. The woman in labor was a little surprised the staff had not shown her so much care and attention in previous times. "Don't worry. It's because you have twins," the midwife reassured her. "Twins always get special treatment. Everything will be fine." But the midwife was wrong. In the morning, the mother of many children was given only 1 son to feed. The second one did not survive the night, she was sadly told. In fact, the baby had been secretly handed over to Jonathan's family. That was the plan he had proposed to the gardener. That same night, Kimberly also arrived at the maternity hospital, supposedly with contractions starting. No one was to suspect that the baby wasn't hers. She and Jessica were discharged on the same day. Jessica was greeted by her husband and older children, happy with the successful outcome. And Kimberly had a grand discharge with music, balloons, and a guest photographer. No one, except a very limited circle of people, knew that the babies held by these women were actually twin brothers. Those who were privy to the secret kept silent after receiving a round sum of money and a stern warning. That's how it happened, Bridget finished. Alex ended up in Jonathan's family, and Travis was separated from his blood relatives. But not for long. After a couple of years, all the children from that family were taken away by the guardianship authorities. At that time, Travis was already an older brother, and another girl was born. "So I grew up in an orphanage," Travis continued. "I wouldn't say my childhood was very hard. We had a good life, peaceful. We were brought up, educated. I graduated from the College of Mathematics and Computer Science. Now I work as a programmer. I have a family in the capital, a wife, 2 children, a flat. Everything as it should be." Jessica flapped her eyes confusedly, looking at Travis. What a story. Really like a fairy tale. How would Alex feel about it? Good thing she was the first to know she could prepare her husband. It'll be a real shock for him, won't it? And the mother-in-law, they're elderly people. They should be told too, but very delicately. Jessica couldn't decide how to feel about Alex's parents' behavior. On the one hand, it was immoral and illegal. On the other hand, her husband lived in luxurious conditions, not wandering around in orphanages. And the childless couple were happy to have a child. My mother sometimes visited me at the orphanage, Travis continued. I guess she loved children, but she was just irresponsible. She brought me cheap candy, stroked my head. We didn't starve at the orphanage, of course, but I waited for those visits and sweets like manna from heaven. Because it is important for every child to know that he is loved. Growing up, Travis did not abandon his mother, helped her with money, tried to treat her. She drank heavily. Because of this, father died early. But the son could not perform a miracle and change his mother. He only had to support her and watch her sink and lose her human form. One day the woman became seriously ill. Liver problems began, not surprising after years of alcoholism. Travis visited his mother in the hospital, bought medicines, but the doctors didn't give a single chance. The days were running out. The elderly woman realized this and one day told her son Travis, the only one of the children who had not abandoned her. This story of twins, a wealthy family and a child given to a childless wealthy couple. The husband had once revealed the truth to his wife, after another feast, explained where he had suddenly got a large sum of money from back then. More than 20 years had passed, so the woman was not particularly surprised by that story, but of course remembered the story of her husband. She was even happy for her son, who now lived like a prince, without needing anything. She praised her husband for his decision. The mother wanted to find Jonathan's family just to have a look at the other twin. But the businessman and his family moved somewhere almost immediately after they got the baby. Jonathan sold the business, the house, the property, and seemed to disappear. As I found out later, he started a new life in another city. Bought a completely different business, settled in a new place. That is, right here, Travis said. Jessica felt a mixture of feelings: surprise, joy, anxiety, and relief. Relief that Alex was faithful to her and not making things up. But what a shock to their entire family. Alex will probably be happy to hear the news about a twin, because he has dreamed of a brother since childhood. It was his only wish, which his parents could never fulfill. I was happy when I heard my mother's story, too, Travis continued. She was gone the next day, by the way. If she'd kept quiet, she would have taken that secret to her grave. But now I knew I had a twin brother. And I was determined to find him at any cost. I'd kept in touch with my other siblings all along, all of whom had grown up to be decent people, educated, with families. But a twin brother, your exact copy, your natural clone, that's a whole other thing. Travis hired private investigator Bridget. Bridget got to work and very quickly got on the trail. Jonathan Smith, was that difficult? The girls smiled. They'd moved away from Alex's birth family, of course, but they hadn't done much to cover their tracks. I found them quickly. We've been here for a month now, Travis smiled. We've been looking around, gathering the latest evidence that this isn't a mistake. Although the most important evidence here is Alex's appearance. We're practically identical. Even you and your wife didn't realize it right away. The final proof is ready. There's no mistake, Jessica asked. The next step is for the brothers to meet. That's the step Travis is hesitant to take Bridget's side. And then suddenly you guys came along. It just happened, she said. Well, Jessica smiled. So we'll all have a celebratory dinner tonight. I'll be waiting for everyone at home. I need time to get Alex ready, so come round at 8. You know the address, don't you? Of course we do, Travis answered.
Arriving at the call to the little girl, Christy froze when she saw her husband, who left on a business trip yesterday. A4. Christy walked over to the coffee machine to make herself a double shot of hot, strong savior. She had night duty in the ER tonight, and she'd never learned to sleep half an hour between calls. Any rest is just a bother. The nimble nurse Vanessa, with whom the pediatric ambulance doctor has already gone through many difficult cases, about sleep joked. Uncle Sleep has come to me again. He is starving me even on the move. I can't get coffee in me anymore. Energy drinks in bright metal cans, alas, do not save me. And they're disgusting. When the life of a child somewhere in their city held on the edge, balancing on the edge of the abyss, Vanessa was able to gather so that the doctor only marveled. Iron nerves, iron character, she remembered from her youth a phrase either from a cartoon or from song. From herself, she mentally added, and a heart of gold of enormous size, which manages to fit love for the whole world. After each return from a call, Vanessa and their driver, Miles, fell asleep with their heads barely touching the cushions on the sofas in the lounge. Their crew chief, Christy, on the other hand, felt everything at her post, always staying fully alert. Christy embraced the still steaming cup with both hands, blissfully sipped her favorite smell with her nose, and thought with pleasure. I'll come home after my shift. I don't need to cook anything. There are a couple of cutlets in the fridge and the rest of yesterday's mashed potatoes. Winston's husband had been away on a business trip since this morning. Free the parrots from cooking for 3 days ahead. The woman stretched her legs out on the coffee table, peering at her assistants. Ashley was dozing sweetly to the peaceful hum of the split system. It had been a sweltering summer this year. The machine had been working like crazy for the past 24 hours. Where did it get its mechanical strength? Miles was sleeping peacefully. Everyone at the ambulance station knew he was in love with Cynthia. But for some reason he was hesitant to confess his feelings to her. The 6'2" big man had been in the hot zone as a contract serviceman. After the injury, Miles lost his wife, who did not want to see in the house of a freak with a scar across the cheek. In the presence of rambunctious Vanessa, the former Miles turned into a timid lamb, stammered when she asked him questions. He would blush if they made unwitting contact. Christy smiled, remembering how her Winston had cut interested circles around her almost 20 years ago. He'd approached her in the park, where she was cramming Latin on a spring afternoon so she wouldn't fail her medical school exam. "May I sit down? Is the bench next to you free?" The pretty, blonde-haired Christy flashed her gray-green eyes at him and moved her thick briefcase with textbooks closer to her. "Why didn't you like the neighboring benches? There are plenty of unoccupied benches." "I've always liked that bench in the shade of the chestnut tree. I come here often," said Winston, the burly man, and he turned red all over. "Then my arguments are over. You amuse me, girl. Let's get acquainted, shall we?" I can't dare to take the initiative myself, and holding out his palm, sweating with excitement, a little frightened Winston. Winston did not shake Christy's hand. He began frantically wiping the moisture on his light summer trousers. Christy lightly touched his hand with her fingertips and said, "And I'm Christy. For short, Chris. Sometimes my friends also call me Christine. The nickname stuck to me when I was a kid." Winston smiled happily and said, "I'd like to earn the right to be called Christina, too." "I'd like to earn the right to call you Christy, too, so I can be your friend. And let's switch to you." "Let's do it," replied the girl. "Why all the curtsy and ceremony at our age?" Christy had to run to the dormitory that day so that she could be fresh in her Latin exam tomorrow. With Winston, they agreed that he would wait for her outside the institute. If she passed the exam, they would go for ice cream and cakes at the Boulevard Patisserie. The red light on the emergency station's console lit up. The dispatcher was quickly recording something on the computer screen while making notes in the work log. "Squad, on your way. I've already uploaded the address to Miles on the app. Hurry up. It's a house on the edge of town. Baby's suffocating. Parents can't figure out what's causing the sudden attack." Vanessa quickly threw on her medical uniform and rushed down the stairs from the first floor. "Christy, I brought my suitcase. Even had time to slip your file folder in next to it. Let's not waste any time. I have a feeling this is going to be an unusual case. Quickly throwing themselves into the car, which was already parked under the vapors, the friendly trio under Christie's leadership moved on the road. The night city was slowly falling behind the hot heat of the day. It even seemed to Miles that at times the asphalt under the wheels of the old car was melting. But there was no time to think about it, and he drove carefully and quickly. If the road continued to be so deserted, they would get there in about an hour. Christie, sitting next to the chauffeur, thought, I should have put Vanessa and Miles next to each other for that hour. As Miles drove the car at top speed, in the back of the car Vanessa was thinking sad thoughts. She had 30 years of life under her belt, not the easiest. An orphan since the 3rd year of high school. Her family was the rare case where the father of the family, who disliked strange ladies, disappeared from the house one fine autumn evening. And it all started when the woman, the mother of the household, left. Vanessa's mother fell in love with a young chef colleague and followed him to the ends of the earth. Y isn't going for 5 years practically to Alaska as head of production in a newly opened restaurant the edge of geography. After such a treacherous act of his wife, Vanessa's father went off the chain, methodically went through the entire flat, carefully searching for any images of his wife. Torn to shreds wedding photos that stood in a frame on the dresser and in the wall behind the glass, destroyed traces of the mother of little Vanessa in the bathroom. When he inadvertently flicked a view of his wife's forgotten bottle of perfume off the shelf, it shattered with a pitiful crunch against the tile on the floor. And the man stood there and stomped the shards with his feet, as if he had trampled the remains of his love in the bathtub into solid ground. Then the smell of mum was still lingering and persistent. Vanessa was only 10 years old at the time. She still couldn't understand what was wrong with her if her mum left her with her dad without even talking to her goodbye. The word love was unknown to her. Her parents did not show any romantic tendencies. They were reserved and businesslike with each other. Later, analyzing her childhood, or rather what she remembered from it, Vanessa gave herself a promise to raise the chosen one to heaven with her warm affection, not to repeat the mistakes of her parents. The girl's father drowned his longing in a rather peculiar way. He didn't resort to the bottle. He plunged headlong into work. The man who had been abandoned by his wife worked as a plumber. The master was such that to him for a couple of months queues lined up. If it was necessary to install an expensive bathtub or toilet in an elite flat without a hitch, none of the luxurious side not to scratch no one around even guessed that the miracle plumber set himself a grandiose task to earn fabulous money, fly to his wife to the north, to prove that he was her the only one favorite man from which to not run away. In a beautiful tin box from under a walnut sausage, the master collected notes of different denominations, not once even allowing himself to spend a couple of dollars on beer. The bundle grew, became a thick pile, and pleasantly warmed his hands with its heaviness. At this time, the object of his dreams there in the north, having found himself in an unaccustomed environment, did not cope with the cold realities. The tragedy was so trivial that the neighbors, the recently arrived restaurant manager, only shook their heads when they learned that she had decided to walk a couple of blocks home without a company car in the worst blizzard. The mother of little Vanessa was lost in the snowy captivity already after a couple of steps from the sky. Snowflakes descended not smoothly, as she was used to. They came down dark, icy, piercing, like a flock of large birds of prey. They covered her mouth, her nose. She couldn't breathe. Her knees buckled, as if the harsh winter had struck her with a stick. She settled helplessly into the snowdrift. There was no strength to scream, to call for help. When an hour later her husband, who began to worry, did not find her friend at home, organized a search. When the woman was found, she was still alive. She passed away later, quietly. The southern body could not cope with pneumonia. So Vanessa became a half-orphan. but they found out what had happened much later. The criminal story of Vanessa's father himself could easily have been the subject of a detective story. After his wife's sudden escape, he worked like a man possessed for a year. Finally, he'd saved up what he thought would be a strong argument for bringing his wife home. The savings came in handy, but there was no flight from their town to the far north. He had to get to a larger airport by train first. The compartment companions seemed like nice guys. They had elite French cognac in their bag. He couldn't even pronounce its name clearly. He had Ossetian pies from a nearby bakery, a couple of his favorite juicy lemons, a chocolate bar. Vanessa's father had a sweet tooth. It was a hearty dinner. He didn't even realize he was going somewhere. He became sluggish, relaxed, began to tell his new friends the story of his life. Even traitorous tears came to his eyes. When the neighbors offered him to play a few games of fool, he did not even suspect that such a gambling game only in his hands held no more than a dozen times in his life. Therefore, at the remark, "Well, you've got to be kidding. Even with epaulettes you left us. You should play for money, lucky boy. In no time you'll leave everyone here without trousers." Lucky reacted with enthusiasm. Who would give up his money bag so easily? Everyone threw in $1 on the card game. A ridiculous amount just for fun. In front of the eyes of the woe traveler, paper pictures with kings and ladies were spinning like in a mystical trick. You only had time to figure out what to throw on the table once again with a fan of colorful portraits. The first $1,000 to cheerful mates Vanessa's father lost out of pure interest, for a light drive. How did this amount in 1 hour increase 100 times? I couldn't even figure it out. My head felt like cast iron. My eyes were all blurry. For some reason he wanted to sleep. The last thing he heard as he fell into the viscous darkness was, "Ashley, help Winston, he's got his heel on his money bag." Then silence and darkness. For some reason it seemed to him that he was no longer in a compartment sitting on a bed cozily separated by a caring conductor, but was swaying together with the carriage in some narrow metal space. A sharp scraping of something metal, cold wind, wet drops of rare rain in his face. Flight. The body of my father, who had been thrown out of the train, was found a couple of weeks later in a dense roadside thicket, quite by chance, between two settlements near the railway track. In these places even mushroom pickers and holiday makers appeared very rarely. And here a couple of lovers were brought into the forest belt. They rode their bicycles, spent some time alone, without prying eyes, and were about to go home. Attention was attracted by a red rag in the bushes, which turned out to be a colored sports bag. Then there was a long identification of the deceased, search for relatives. That's when it turned out that Vanessa's mum wasn't alive either. Where did the money intended for the restoration of the family go? How did the man end up near the railway line? No one ever found out. There was a man, and then he was gone for nothing. Vanessa, left for the period of her father's departure to the north in the care of a kind-hearted neighbor, was sent by the guardianship authorities to an orphanage. And their new walls, a new life. She was a sociable girl. Other children in the state institution shut themselves off. She, on the contrary, as if opened up to her peers and carers in her studies and in all activities. Vivacious Vanessa, with a mop of blonde hair, brown mocha-colored eyes, and a slim figure, is ahead of the world. Her favorite subjects are biology and chemistry, hobby participation in a series of theater productions. But also in sports competitions, hikes among the girls, the best friend is not to be found. In one of the educational outings, classmate Vanessa stepped on a rusty nail. Bad place, bad wound. Even the gym teacher and the young teacher were confused. It was more than a kilometer to the camp. Blood was gushing from Anthony's wound, scarlet, boiling. Vanessa and the others looked at the wound for a few seconds. Then they couldn't even tell how the fearless girl had made a tourniquet above the injured place from some rope that had come from nowhere, and shouted into the crowd. Write down for Cynthia the time she knitted it and call her. Now. She tore the white cotton shirt she wore into improvised bandages. Quickly get the first aid kit. See what disinfectants I've got, Vanessa commanded. Some aunt forgot to put a fresh batch of sterile bandages in it before the trip. A little later, having recovered from the shock, the gym teacher threw his jacket over the shoulders of the girl, who remained in one thin top. With the help of 2 students, he made a stretcher out of tree branches. The boy could hardly walk on his own, limping and writhing in pain. Already at the orphanage, in the inpatient medical room, Cynthia told Vanessa after the ambulance had left. I've just heard the doctors praise you for the first aid you gave so expertly. You're the one who should be singing an ode to you, not me. The old crow. Didn't you check before the trip that the first aid kit was poorly equipped? Shame on my gray head. Where did you get this professional knowledge, child? Vanessa laughed and replied, I don't know. Firstly, I love films and TV series about doctors. Secondly, it's like someone is sitting inside me and telling me, take this, and do that. That's how it came about by itself. That Vanessa chose for herself the future profession of a medic. It was not by necessity of compulsory study somewhere after the orphanage, but by a great sincere love. The ambulance drove heavily up the slight rise at the end of the alley and stopped in front of the house at 10 7th Avenue. Christy deftly picked up her suitcase and walked briskly to the wicket. Vanessa was already standing behind her, covering her rear, as usual. An old brass bell was visible on the wooden gate. And Christy thought, it's a rarity. It must have been out of commission a long time ago. But the bell did not let her down. It rang loudly in the dead silence of the empty street. Confident footsteps sounded behind the wicket, and the next moment it swung open. A silent scene. The audience might have stood up and announced the neighborhood with a tumultuous, prolonged applause. In front of Christy stood her husband, Winston, who had left on a business trip that morning. On seeing his wife, the husband stammered and whispered, "Come in, please. The girl is in the house, in the back room." Christy and Vanessa rushed through the house. Iron hammers rang in the former's head. All the questions later. Right now, it's just the girl and her life. But what does it all mean? Why is Winston here? What has he got to do with this little girl? The anteroom smelled hauntingly of dusty candles piled by the front door. There was a general lack of tidiness that was evidently a constant feature of the place. In the next room were the aromas of yesterday's borscht, which had already passed more than one test, biscuits, and a little cinnamon. The little patient was lying on a small sofa, and a young lady of exotic appearance was rushing around her. Seeing her mummy, Christy was a little confused. Dreadlocks of frightened hair the color of acid fuchsia, eyes thickly lined with black. Bottom jeans with huge fancy scuffs on the knees, top a shapeless t-shirt with a strange pattern on it. The thought fluttered helplessly in my head again. Winston. What is her Winston doing here? A lover of immaculate cleanliness and classic style and dress, he couldn't possibly be here by definition, but he was standing next to her, looking at her with the pathetic eyes of a sick dog. Vanessa felt the ridiculousness of the situation. In a loud voice, she commanded, "Stand back. Let the doctor examine the girl. And you, mummy, quickly tell us what's going on." The baby lying on the pillow was so similar in appearance to Winston that Christy's heart almost stopped. Christy listened intently, a heartbeat or two she was sure to miss. It became clear that angina, neurological swelling, had affected her larynx. The girl could barely breathe. There were signs of hives on her face. The little girl involuntarily pulled her hand to the nasty spots, trying to scratch them. Surprisingly, Winston was the one to answer the EMT's questions. It was as if Christy had been poured a bucket of ice water on him, and he seemed to jump right in, too. My daughter and I were at the circus today, he began. There's a touring show with little artists. Ponies. Our little girl is obsessed with horses. In the second act, just as the show started, Cassandra's lips started to swell. And then her face started to swell in front of her eyes. I knew right away that something was wrong. We went to the circus medical center, where my daughter was given some antihistamine. The swelling went away in a flash and we went home. At home everything was fine at first, but then Cassandra started to wheeze. I found some sawdust from the circus arena in her hands. It turned out that when she was being wheeled around by one of the pony horses at intermission, she had picked up a handful of chopped up wooden pieces on the floor, all the while sniffing them to remember how beautiful her horse was. I assume it's a severe allergy. Christy listened to his monologue and couldn't believe her ears. My daughter and I went home. Who is Winston saying all those words about? How can this be? For a moment, rainbow circles swam before her eyes. She met Vanessa's gaze and she realized the doctor wasn't feeling well. Christy was about to faint right in the middle of this small, stuffy room. Of course, Vanessa knew her colleague's husband. Undoubtedly, she realized that her doctor's handler knew nothing about her husband having a child on the side. In a decisive move, the nurse sat Christy down in a chair, waved the cotton wool soaked in ammonia in front of her nose. Only said a few words. Suspected Quinky's oedema. Will get her to the hospital. The doctor nodded dejectedly. It's a serious condition, no matter how severe the bronchial spasm. Vanessa was ready. The adrenaline and prednisolone should have bought them time. After the injections, Cassandra's face began to take on a normal color. Vanessa commented, turning to the man. Don't just stand there. Go outside, tell our driver to bring a stretcher. We'll transport the girl to the hospital. We must try to avoid other, more complicated manipulations. I wouldn't want to put a tube in her trachea for a little girl like that. Christy acted like a robot, automatically. She woke up when she and Winston were already in the car, sitting on either side of the girl. Cassandra's breathing was still intermittent, but noticeably evened out. Winston kept his anxious eyes on the child, full of longing. And Christy was reminded of something else. After they had first met and she had passed her Latin exam, their relationship had developed rapidly. Within a week, they couldn't live a day without each other, unconditionally liked by parents on both sides. After Christy's 4th year, they married, moved into the flat of the glorious grandmother Winston. Cheerful old lady rushed to her younger sister in the village, where she enthusiastically engaged in the cultivation of flowers. She could not be lured back to the city. Christy and Winston lived soul to soul. To quarrel or to start something to find out it was not about them. They were always on the same page about everything. Tough Winston worked as a swimming coach at a children's sports school. Christy safely graduated from medical school, was going to residency. But she couldn't decide on a specialty, she joked. I see myself as an ophthalmologist in a white coat, then a doctor in the office with a mass of shining metal instruments. Fate forced her to make a choice. After defending her diploma, as if by some command from above, now you can, Christy became pregnant. 9 months later, another sturdy little boy, Anthony, was born. Their cat, their love, and their joy. Everything developed as it should. As the happy head of the family often joked. It's time to sit sits confidently, it's time to walk stomp briskly. Christy, at that time a little away from medicine. All tried to spend more time with his son. As if intuition suggested that this carelessness will not last long. Trouble knocked on their family's door when Anthony was 3 years old. Christy's mentor, who had always told the young woman that she had an aptitude for medicine, hinted that in another 6 months she would not be welcome in any medical institution. This profession loves those who do not get distracted and are constantly improving. Even before learning that she was about to become a mum, Christy had changed her plans for her specialization. As future patients, she appointed the youngest infants, newborns. She decided to become a neonatologist, scrupulously studied all sorts of pathologies in crumbs, barely born. She was lost in the pediatric intensive care unit, but then her fervor waned. Anthony took up all her time and thoughts. To return to her chosen field of medicine, Christy had to plunge into the thick of current events of the department, where she found a place for a novice pediatrician. Anthony, the big boy, went to daycare. Winston continued his activities with his charges in the sports section. Everything in their family flowed according to the planned course. A couple of months later, the kindergarten teacher asked Christy to look at her in the methodology room after work. Here she told the boy's mother her observations and concerns. But first she asked, "Do you notice anything strange about your son lately?" Christy raised her eyebrows in surprise and opened her amazed eyes wide. "My husband and I both work very hard. We see Anthony most of the time in the evenings, but he seems healthy and alert. What exactly made you suspicious?" "We were preparing for a matinee in the group. All the folk dances the kids weren't doing right. Anthony, having made another round of the music room with his little partner, stopped abruptly and sat down on the children's chair. I didn't think much of it at the time, but your son started stopping as he walked more and more often. Christy, it seemed to me that his lips were turning a bluish color at this point. And yesterday we had a checkup with the pediatrician from our local hospital. She advised to show the boy to a pediatric cardiologist. I'm a doctor myself, also a pediatrician. I could not see anything in my son," Christy confidently replied to the teacher. And she thought to herself, or could. Without delay, the next day she took Anthony to her home department. The doctor's verdict was overwhelming. "Your son has a rare form of heart defect, which usually manifests itself only by the age of 3 or 4 years. The only way out is an urgent operation, otherwise he will not live for 6 months. His condition will worsen every day. In our city, such a complex surgical intervention is impossible. The experience of such operations has already been gained in New York. Cardiac surgery centers in Germany, Switzerland, or Israel will also be able to cope well with it." Christy and Anthony walked home with slow steps. It seemed that now her boy would get sick and his heart would not hold out. Winston rushed from the sports school as soon as she called him, and Christy kept poring over textbooks, notes, medical literature. It appeared that in their case, a favorable and a fatal outcome were equally likely, 50-50. Where can I find the point that will make the swing go in the right direction? The cost of the rare and complex surgery in New York was fabulous. As time flew by, Christy and Winston were unable to raise the necessary sum. Even selling her grandmother's old flat with her permission and moving into a one-room flat in the suburbs did not even out the balance. When one of the charitable foundations intervened in the seemingly hopeless case, everything moved forward. Finally, the operation and treatment were paid for, tickets to New York were bought, and things were packed. But Anthony died on the operating table. The swing didn't want to lean in the direction of their marital happiness and well-being. There was no negligence, no medical error, no serious preconditions, just the severe illness itself. Christy, being a pediatrician, understood all this perfectly well. But her heart froze the moment the surgeon came out of the operating theater and waved his hands, saying nothing. She and Winston understood everything at once. There was no cry, no sigh. Only they hugged each other tighter. They seemed to stand like that the whole time their son was trying to be saved under the cold glow of the bright lamps. They returned home devastated. Christy kept saying, "It's time's fault. We let it slip away, while we were trying to raise money for the operation. If we'd come to New York sooner, everything would have been fine." Then she took a course to retrain as a pediatrician to work in an ambulance. It became important to her to save at least someone else's baby. That's when she first told her husband her motto: "We are always responsible for everything." Some people just go through life without realizing it. 2 years after Anthony's death, Winston talked to Christy about having a second child. She herself couldn't explain why she felt the way she did now. She didn't want to give birth again, didn't want to have another child. She wanted to devote all her efforts, abilities and skills henceforth only to children in distress, sick, injured, but not her own. Winston accepted it. He did not start any more conversations on this subject, did not hint. He was there for him, his own, dear to his heart. And now, they rode side by side beside his daughter by some strange girl. Christy wouldn't even mentally call her mother. As in a delirium, at the bottom of her soul ruled only one thought: what could her husband and this miracle in feathers have in common? On that distant June day, when Winston wandered through the fields of the local park, it did not occur to him that on one of the benches he was waiting for his fate in the form of a girl with gorgeous gray-green eyes. A lovely beauty who had no equal in the whole world. Pretty as hell in his male sense. She was fiddling with a biro, whispering intently with her lips. She twisted a thick strand of hair on her finger, wrinkled her nose, chewed a sausage sandwich, drinking some drink from a plastic bottle, and turned the pages again. She did it all at the same time, without any confusion about the sequence of actions. Winston fell in love at first sight. His feet brought him to the bench and the girl. And then he was a little confused, so he said the first thing that came into his head, but he did not lose the power of speech. She herself had offered to meet him. She didn't refuse to go with him the next day to the ice cream parlor. In any love family story, there are two faces, two participants, two heroes. If someone were to write down Winston and Christy's memories, there would be two similar stories on paper. They realized they loved and wanted to be together. They were close, they were friendly, they understood each other. Wanted, waited, and then raised Anthony together. Everything was the same, shared. Everything was shared. Together they met a misfortune like no other. The son left, they stayed. Not by the laws of nature, the older outlived the younger. Winston fanatically wanted another child, but Christy closed the subject, perhaps forever. At his sports school, he prepared his pupils so fiercely for competition that two of them first took silver and gold at the city competition, and then distinguished themselves as first in the state and went on to the federal level. Invitations to competitions all over the country came pouring out of the horn. The head coach even hinted that they might be in the running for the National Cup. Christy almost did not notice now his endless trips to all sorts of business trips. She was sure that the adventures on the side of her husband will not look for adventures. They unconditionally remained the closest people who were not spared by grief. Each of them escaped from memories in his own way. That trip to a tempting picturesque resort in Florida, which was in full preparation for the soon-to-be Olympic Games, was unusual from the start. It was still a year and a half before the world's most important competition. Construction was boiling everywhere in the city. The coach and his team even tried out a new hotel and cafe on the embankment, which were designed for guests. Having appeared on a magnificent, beautiful landscape as fallen on the coast, and then also having won in the next competitions, all were going home happy. When buying tickets, the following fact came to light: too many professional people from all over the country were traveling back and forth to Florida at that time. Travel documents became scarce. The coach was forced to buy a ticket in a sleeping car SV. In a compartment for two with a neighbor was a girl, as it later turned out, Megan, a painter. She was going home to the city on holiday. She'd bought her ticket at the last minute too. Brown hair, blue eyes. God had a bit of a brain. She was always talking rubbish. Winston shouldn't have baptized his children with her. Athletic build, well-muscled figure, serious look, inquisitive eyes. Women always liked him, but he wasn't interested in that. He was attached to his burden, by common joys and sad ties. He paid little attention to other ladies, even if they gave him unequivocal attention. The girl in the compartment was about 10 years younger than he was. When he entered, she was eating a pie with potatoes and drinking a Coke. She nodded at the greeting, introduced herself. Terry. I'm going on holiday 9 months almost without a day off. Painter on the objects for a fortnight. The foreman gave me a holiday. Sit down. Why are you frozen like a pillar? We're here for almost 24 hours. This monologue made Winston sit down on the second shelf. The train started peacefully. A beautiful landscape floated outside the window. 10 minutes later, his boys came to visit him and immediately began to tease the coach. Chief, can't we switch places? Such a girl is traveling with you. You won't shame the team's victories on all fronts. Terry was easy. She didn't flirt. She didn't make eyes at him. She didn't flirt with him. She didn't flirt at all. She gave him some cakes, took one of his sandwiches, went to the conductors for coffee for the two of them, waved him off. Some things women are entitled to by status. I'm already 23 years old. I look younger because of my small stature, but I'm already a lady of stature. The passenger train glided smoothly along the smooth tracks. The day outside the window changed to a long black night with few bright lights of stars in the sky. Winston and Terry discussed the latest Hollywood premieres, the mores of show business stars, the beauty of Miami, and then languidly told each other a couple of anecdotes from what they could remember. Then the conversation dried up, and they decided to go to bed. Winston flipped through some railway newspapers for a while. Terry delved into a detective story. Boring. They both lay down on their sides with their backs to their traveling companion and pretended to fall asleep. After half an hour of torment, Winston did doze off. He awoke to hands stroking his shoulders. Don't be afraid, Coach. You're a brutal man. Too hard to resist, Terry whispered. Winston twitched on the shelf, stood up abruptly, turned round to face her. What are you doing, traveling companion? I told you I was married. You've never been away from your wife, Winston? Never cheated on her. Of course you haven't, said the man angrily. But inside him the excitement was already reviving. Terry caught the change in his mood, and then what happened happened. We hadn't talked much since this morning. No, I don't want coffee. Thank you, he said sharply. Since the evening, Terry did not raise her eyes to Winston, as if ashamed. In their own city, they went off to different sides of the platform. His memories of that night were strange. For some reason, he didn't even consider it cheating on his wife. And then the unexpected happened. In the middle of autumn, Winston, as usual, locked the door of the men's locker room, when a security guard called out to him from the lobby. Winston, there's a girl here looking for you, the guard said. Going downstairs, Winston was surprised to see his traveling companion from the train to Miami on the doorstep of the children's sports school. She gestured for him to pass and said through gritted teeth, "How many partners I've had. But to get pregnant after one time, it's never happened before." "Hey, Coach, abortions are expensive these days. You're going to have to help me out with the money." Winston couldn't believe his ears. He could be a father again. He could have a son or a daughter. He would give half his life for such an opportunity. Quickly grabbing Terry under the elbow, he dragged her around the corner of the building to the summer sports field. There he sat her down on a bleacher near the football field and said loud and clear, "You will bear me this child, and I will be by your side and your husband his father. Just dare to do anything to harm the baby, you'll be sorry." Terry resisted. "So who are you that I should waste my youth and life on your offspring? You found yourself a surrogate mum, free of charge, and then maybe someone will call me to marry and I'll be with your extra." They sat down again and discussed the terms. Winston in everything helps Terry financially, comes to her at any time at her first request. The baby's fate will be decided after birth. She in return leads a healthy lifestyle for the remaining 7 months, does not do anything that could harm the baby. They learnt about becoming parents of a girl after the next ultrasound. I didn't want a boy, but a girl. I'll think about whether to keep it or make a present for you, Daddy. Have you already pleased your wife? Terry sneered. Winston looked at her and thought, how could I have been so weak on the train to be around a woman like that? He kept preparing to talk to Christy, wanting to tell her everything, to apologize, but he hesitated and put off the explanation. Let the girl be born, and then he will confess everything to the woman he loves. Cassandra was born quickly, healthy, without any abnormalities. 5 days later, Winston took Terry from the hospital. Surprisingly, this perky woman treated the baby very carefully and reverently. Whether the maternal instinct woke up, or the fact that the girl was pretty quiet, calm. It was as if she felt that there was some impropriety in her birth. Daddy and Mummy did not live together. There was no normal, in the conventional sense, family around. 3 months after the birth of his daughter, Winston offered Terry to draw up documents for adoption with the subsequent transfer of the baby to him, so that the woman again became free of any obligations. The refusal was unexpectedly abrupt. Moreover, Terry insisted that he did not tell his wife anything, otherwise she would lay down her bones, but she would separate him from Cassandra. At first, Winston was in doubt, wanted to involve lawyers to win back his daughter, and kept a close eye on whether Terry was treating the girl well. There was nothing to fault. She'd even managed to save up a decent amount of money for the baby, so there was no way to get her on the financial hook. As time went on, Winston got used to making visits to his second home, where Cassandra invariably greeted him with a joyful squeal. Sometimes they took walks together. Sometimes they even had lunch or dinner together as a big dad, mom and daughter. Christy was fanatical about her work, taking extra duty, not paying the slightest attention to her husband's absences. But if they were at home together in the rare hours, it was almost the same kind, affectionate, attentive. Tired from the night vigil, the ambulance crew pulled up outside the emergency room of the Children's City Hospital. In a moment, 2 burly orderlies were already carrying a stretcher with Cassandra into the examination room. The doctors scurried about, immediately reassuring everyone that the girl's life was not in danger. Christy's mission was over. The girl was delivered without incident. Winston stayed with his daughter. Christy had to go back to the emergency substation. Later, in the evening, her husband would tell her everything honestly about those long-ago events on the train. Christy had almost calmed down by then. I am surprised that she did not consider her husband's brief affair a crime against their family. It was as if she felt all Winston's greed for this girl, in whom his dream of having a child was realized. People have different destinies. In different ways, heaven helps to find the happiness of fatherhood. Things began to look even busier between them. Christy advised her husband on which doll to buy, for the discharge of the girl bought for her sweets, birthday and New Year's gifts. Once only asked Winston why the little girl's mother had such a strange appearance. Winston explained that such metamorphosis with the appearance of Terry began to happen recently. Both of them had no idea at the time what Cassandra's mother's pink dreadlocks in her hair and her affectations would lead to. The thing was, Terry had fallen in love with the new guy on their crew. The man called himself a freelance nomadic painter, painted a portrait of her on the wall during breaks, and then painted over it himself with an even coat of colored paint. Terry had dreadlocks like his, a shade he'd recommended. The free artist didn't ask her out, didn't look languidly into her eyes, didn't shower her with gifts, didn't even hint at a rapprochement somewhere in a secluded corner of the construction site. He beckoned her with his bohemian spirit, his charm, even through the beautifully cut holes in his jeans. Refinement and aristocracy slipped into his every gesture, movement, turn of the head. What wind had brought this unrecognized genius to the construction site? Terry didn't ask herself. She only prayed that this artistic genius would not disappear from their educational horizon on some welcome day. Now she imitated her idol in everything, dressed like her gifted idol, smoked long, thin cigarettes like her god, tasted like her prince for lunch rolls and wasabi, for dinner a glass of Italian wine and elite cheese with mold. Cassandra paid less and less attention, pretending to still be the perfect mother only when Winston showed up. There was no alarm at Winston's positive change in tone. By the New Year holidays, Terry felt that her love was no more visibly about to take wing between falling into the maelstrom of love. Nomad told her that he doesn't stay in one place longer than 2 or 3 months. He gets bored. Art school, where he learned a craft, abandoned in the 3rd year, won the craving for a change of places. In unknown lands, Terry broke away after the object of her love and a fortnight after the appearance of longing in his eyes. But first she was well prepared. She already knew that Winston had no secrets from his wife, so she invited them both to the cafe to talk about an important matter. Having ordered coffee and cakes for the whole company, to sweeten the pill, as she thought, she didn't beat around the bush. "I've met the man of my life, it seems. The kind of love people call ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. Cassandra's no longer my thing. God knows I wasn't always such a bad mother to her. I'm attached to her in my own way. Now I want to get on with my own life. If you want, Slava, draw up the documents. I'll give you my daughter and go away." Christy was shocked by this proposal. She was not the least bit opposed to Winston's daughter living with them. But how can a mother give up her child like that? The image of Anthony's little boy floated before her eyes. A sharp needle of pain pricked at my heart. "If you'd come back, darling, I'd never give you up to anyone aloud, however," she said. "We are always responsible for our loved ones. Winston, you haven't said a word yet. And I'm ahead of the curve, as always. We agree, Terry, to take your little girl into our family. Do the necessary paperwork. We'll sign everything. And we'll get all the paperwork together on our end for Cassandra's adoption." Easily bypassing all sorts of bureaucratic hurdles, Winston and Christy adopted Cassandra in the shortest possible time. Cassandra had always been fond of her father. Her mother's departure was explained to her as a vital necessity, and she and Aunt Christy quickly hit it off. Cramped but not cramped. Now in their small one-room flat there was always a little bell-ringing voice, always taking part in all the household chores. Cassandra and Papa Winston hung the laundry on the balcony, helping Aunt Christy. And then the female half of the family would bake treats in the kitchen. From the other room came the voice of the head of the family. "Hurry up and come and have tea." That would have been the end of the story. But it is not for us to decide what fate will do. She has already prepared new trials for these people. Another team was to go to the house where the house collapsed. Somebody in the heavenly office decided otherwise. A nurse at a neighboring substation slipped on the porch. The first frost had just arrived in the city, and the insidious ice had been forgotten. Somewhere on the other side of town, near a collapsed house, an ambulance was waiting for the unfortunate victims. The medical worker's leg swelled up before his eyes. Even without x-rays, it was clear to the specialists it was a fracture. Christie's team was rushed to the scene. Vanessa, as always, Miles, indispensable for traveling on any type of road, Christie focused. All assembled were good to go. Even Vanessa doesn't argue about riding in the back. She quickly climbs into the seat with Miles in the cab. No time for arguments and bickering. A couple of days ago, Christie and Vanessa had a serious conversation. Outside of work, they are friendly and on a you basis. Only at work they keep the chain of command. The doctor started the dialogue. But I began to my subordinate not for faults in the service, but for Miles. Don't you have a heart? The whole substation is judging that Miles is pining for you, and you're like not native. I mean, he's good on the inside and out. And the scar on your face, that's a good look for a man. Why are you climbing the wall? I mean, he recoils at any touch from me. Am I unpleasant to him? Am I long? If he touches me, he bounces back. How am I supposed to understand this reaction to me? And you say he's in love. It's all bollocks. Now Vanessa drove beside Miles and again involuntarily admired his masculine profile. She was no longer intimidated by the scar that cut across his eyebrow and snaked down to his lips. Miles was attractive with that very masculine beauty that promised protection and strength to those around him. What remained a mystery was how deliberately he was avoiding her. If he loved her, why did he keep his distance? Miles was afraid to come within a meter of this woman. He was too fond of this person to offend her by an involuntary display of his masculine interest. Now, as soon as Vanessa turned briefly to the window, he glanced at her to admire her unassuming but lovely beauty again. When the nurse returned her head to its original position, Miles sat as if nothing had happened, staring straight ahead at the road. A crowd of curious people had gathered in front of the house where the collapse had occurred on the third and very last floor of a rather old building. It buzzed like hundreds of alarmed bumblebees, filled with rumors, fed with anxious reports from the rescuers, to buzz again in full force. You heard there was a girl crushed by something heavy on the ground floor. She's screaming in pain, and our brave rescuers can't get to her yet. Upon hearing this information, skinny and petite, Christy commanded, "Vanessa, prepare a syringe of anesthetic. I'll try to get through to the injured little girl." At those words, Miles and Vanessa turned around without conspiring. You can't do that until the rescue team gives the go-ahead. The house could collapse at any moment. "It's not the time to be afraid," the brave woman replied. "There is a child there alone, scared, suffering pain. Why do we even have an ambulance if the rescuers are as slow as turtles?" With a syringe of medicine in her outstretched hand, Christy rushed towards the building, near the wall of which the firemen in shiny helmets and the guys from the rescue service were working at the same time. "Woman, where are you going?" Christy was called. "I'm going to try to crawl over to the girl and give her an anesthetic injection. I'm an EMT. It's too narrow in there. None of our guys could get in," she was warned. "I'm going to try anyway." Building rubble, chunks of plaster falling off, blue paint streaks from the wall in the entryway, more rubble and endless dust. Christy was forced to kneel at first, then moved almost crawling. In her mind, she thanked her husband for making her keep fit all these years, going to the swimming pool twice a week, jogging with him in the mornings. At the end of the climb, she finally saw a little girl who had been crushed by a metal door from one of the flats. The little girl's legs were pressed against the heavy rectangular plate like a press, and for some reason they were sticking out towards the exit. It was as if the child had been running and trouble had caught her as she ran. She turned back and called out in a ringing voice, "Here, I'm quite through. 2 skinny men and a girl were crushed by the door, but I'm already giving her an anesthetic injection." "Don't shout. For God's sake," came a whisper in reply. Loud noises in such a dilapidated building are dangerous now. After a couple of minutes, the baby quieted down. Christy began to shoulder the metal barrier into the flat. With difficulty, but the thing moved. There were rustles from behind, and the woman whispered. "The girl is relaxed by the injection. Drag her by her legs. I'll keep pushing the door in the opposite direction." Together the work went more vigorously. The men pulled the girl to the exit through the narrow labyrinth. The way back no longer seemed so uncharted. Christy hesitated for only a few minutes. Outside, people still didn't realize what had happened next. The building started to collapse like a house of cards before their eyes. Only 2 young boys managed to jump out of the building with a little girl in their arms. Christy, a well-known pediatric emergency room doctor in the city, was buried under the rubble forever. Calm. Always quick to focus in difficult situations. Vanessa, the nurse, screamed, rushed to Miles, who had already grabbed her in an armful and started stroking her head like a little girl. It seemed to both of them that they were now being swallowed up before their eyes by some ravenous monster, a toothy maw of rock-strewn debris. It lured Christy, who had bravely stepped into the tunnel with the syringe, inside and swallowed her without choking. People were bustling around. Someone said that the fate of 4 more tenants, orphaned in an instant, was unknown. Christie's crew stood in the midst of the chaos, hugging each other tightly. A little later, with the pretense that their presence here is no longer needed, went to the car, without unhooking the embrace. They had to go to Winston's now to tell him and little Cassandra the bitter news. A fortnight passed. Miles and Vanessa now had a new doctor in charge, an elderly pediatrician who had transferred to the ER from the city's children's clinic. The silent and even a little stern man was a qualified and experienced specialist. But the nurse and the driver felt their close-knit brigade went sole. Everything seemed to be as usual, and everything was wrong. There was no desire to go to work. The day Christie passed away in front of their eyes, they rushed straight to her house. Cassandra was in kindergarten. Winston was packing his bag to leave for another training session. Vanessa had never before seen the emotion on the face of someone who had learned sad news show in such a way. After their account of the last few minutes, it was as if a blackness had run across Winston's face. Just now his eyes were alive and shining, and then the light in them went out and his skin took on a gray hue. How can I find words to comfort a man in such a situation? Everything said would seem empty and unnecessary. Vanessa and Miles realized that now they were superfluous in the midst of this scorched desert. They did not want to scatter. Some thick, strong thread now bound this couple, who had just witnessed a terrible, hopeless tragedy. They arrived at Vanessa's flat together after their shift. It seemed to them both now that no words were needed to explain to each other how much time they had lost. Vanessa cooked a meal as if she'd done it for her and Miles 1,000 times before. Both of them had such a voracious appetite after the stress they'd been under that a huge pan of fried potatoes, generously drenched in eggs, had been devoured in about 5 minutes. Before, Miles had always thought that if Vanessa were near him, he would pounce on her like a hungry wolf. That's not what happened. He had such tenderness for this woman that a little more and he would melt like ice cream in hot weather. Miles felt such happiness inside that it seemed as if all the long agony of waiting hadn't happened. When Vanessa fell into a restless sleep, he was still unable to fall into a restful slumber. He wondered if he had imagined that she, his woman, his dream, his vision, was really sleeping on his shoulder. He was very impressed by the warmth with which Vanessa touched even his ugly scar on his face, how she kissed the curved line, looked into his eyes, whether he liked her kind touch, and acted as if she were a hero, a protector, a support. He immediately remembered the disgust on his wife's face when he returned from the hospital after being wounded. They had not uttered a single word of "I love you, I need you," or "I need you." Everything in their story had been said long ago. Now they were just proving to each other that everything wasn't a mistake, that it was worth it to be patient and wait for things to happen the way they had now. In the morning, Vanessa said nonchalantly, "Miles, you'd better stop by the house and pick up your things. At first, my flat is closer to work and more spacious. Then we'll figure out what to do with your place. I'd join forces with you and exchange our property for something bigger." Miles hadn't known what a quiet family home was before. He and his wife had lived in perpetual separation. He had felt a kind of adamancy all the time then, a kind of coldness within the home walls. It was like he was together with that woman of his. A persistent feeling that they live apart he never let go. That's why he was always on duty. With his Vanessa, it was different from the start. Some kind of reassurance that he was needed and important. That even when he goes to the supermarket to get groceries on behalf of his girlfriend, they have time to miss him. And they greet him so warmly on the doorstep, as if he were returning from some distant journey. Winston, after the tragic death of Christie, lived as if in a delirium. In the morning, he automatically prepared sandwiches and coffee for himself, while stirring on the cooker porridge on milk for Cassandra. The girl became his salvation, his outlet, his light in the window. In his spare time, he couldn't stay in their tiny flat at all. He, Christie, and his parents, after the grief that had fallen on the family, immediately gave up sharply. Almost simultaneously, they became helpless old men. The two eldest of the family began to seek solace in working the land, fanatically planted everything in a row in the garden, finding in this work, if not joy, then oblivion. They tried not to think, not to remember. Even their granddaughter was stubbornly not taken to them on weekends, and they couldn't cope with Cassandra, who asked 100 questions in a minute. Winston took his daughter on impromptu camping trips at weekends. They would go to a river somewhere far away, pitch a tent, wander around the steppe, pick wildflowers for Christie's grave. On the way back, they'd always stop at the cemetery. Winston sat down on a wooden bench and talked for a long time with his beloved woman, who had passed away prematurely. Unhurriedly, he would tell how his and Cassandra's week had gone. Sometimes he proudly boasted that his charges had again won another prize at a prestigious competition. Christie looked up at him from the photograph with her gray-green eyes and smiled that smile of hers with which she liked to announce her life motto. We are responsible for everything. If something happens on the road, be good enough to go to the victorious end. After visiting the cemetery, Winston felt better for a while. And he also noticed a new peculiarity. He was annoyed by carefree women on the street. A cheerful girl would come along, and he would look after her and think angrily. I wonder, my dear, and you would step like this, without fear under the ruins of a building held by a thread, if a stranger's child was crying there. A dark annoyance enveloped him. Why did they all go on living, and his youth is gone from him forever? Cassandra had grown up all at once. In her very young years, she had turned into a sort of wise old woman. She'd never been cranky since kindergarten. Buckwheat porridge with sausages is the best meal for dinner, and the 101st time she read a bedtime story about Cinderella. Every time was like a new discovery. She wasn't afraid to stay home alone if Winston had to go somewhere urgent. After such absences, she'd always ask him thoughtfully, "Tired? Shall I put the kettle on? Let me take your dirty socks to the bath." She'd already lost her second mum, but she never asked Winston any questions along the lines of, "When's Mum coming back?" or "Why are we living together?" They were having a good time. Even in this orphan solitude, they always understood each other with half a word, half a look. Sometimes in the evenings, Miles and Vanessa came round with cakes or cake. Then they would have noisy tea parties together. They remembered Christie with a light sadness. All four at the table loved her. All four of them missed her very much. Winston sometimes painfully wanted to go somewhere far away from this city, where everything reminded of the happy past. But where to get a new, well-trained team of athletes? And his wife's grave is here. The old people are near. I had no desire to fight reality, no matter what. The anniversary of Christie's death was celebrated in a cafe. The brave doctor's former colleagues took care of everything themselves. Winston, Cassandra, parents were brought to the institution, where everything was already ready. Miles and Vanessa recently signed a marriage, deciding not to delay any longer with the officialization of their relationship. Their family was expecting a new addition in a couple of months. They had recently moved into a new flat, having bought it, as they were going to do, with the money from the sale of their bachelor flats. Many warm words were said to Christie at the table. No one wanted to part quickly. This time even Winston's parents expressed a fervent desire to take the girl to themselves for a couple of days. They sincerely missed the little girl. Having seen off the last guests who had gathered in honor of his wife's memory, Winston wandered home through the very park where they had once met. The same bench in the shade of an old chestnut tree. The same alleys of shrubs and flowers, hiding couples in love from prying eyes. In the far corner of the footpath, some company was frolicking all around. There were 3 young men. All together they surrounded some girl, not allowing her to take a single step. Winston's eyes darkened for a moment. The victim of the youths was an exact replica of his wife in their early youth. slim, with a lock of loose hair. The girl stood helplessly between the boys, clutching a dainty handbag. The boys moved predatorily toward Megan, tightening the ring around her more and more. Winston added a step. "Guys, don't you think the lady doesn't want to mingle with you?" One of the young predators turned his head slightly, hissed. "Man, you'd better keep walking past. We'll handle our friend here on our own without interference." A cold chill of rage ran through Winston's body, quickly turning into an angry volcanic scorcher. It was infinitely important to him right now to save this young girl, to stop the insolent subjects from mocking her. Even if the whole company was long and well acquainted, even if there was truly nothing threatening her, it was important to him to get her away from those insolent guys and get her away from here. "I don't think the brisk man understands us," one of the guys said. "Go the other way out of here, passerby. We're all our own people here, and you're an extra." Winston glanced at the girl, whose green eyes were filled with despair. She was silent, but her eyes were pleading for help. Winston could not be mistaken that she was uncomfortable with the unpleasant scene that had been played out here. "The girl will leave with me," Winston gave the boys an ultimatum. "Or are you going to regret that our paths have crossed?" "Look at that funny man," grinned one of the trio, stepping away from his friends and standing opposite Winston. "He doesn't understand orders the first time. He's got a bit of a hound." The boy quickly slipped his hand into his pocket and pulled out a small knife. "How's that for an argument, noble knight, who decided to save the honor of a lady he didn't know? Would you rather I tickle your throat with this toy? Or let's see if our lovely Megan likes that kind of game." Winston often dropped by to visit the instructors who rented one of the gyms at the martial arts school. He wasn't afraid of any attacks from the youngsters. Now it was important to him that they did not touch the girl, so similar to his wife at the time of their first dates. The boys rushed towards their victim, who instead of fleeing the scene, froze in place like a statue. They began to come in from all sides, but Winston was only aroused by this. He only had a couple of shots of vodka that night. The rest was done by hatred for the scum who thought that they were the masters of this park, that they were untouchable, and everything was allowed to them. And how much older he was than them, about 10 years, no more. They could almost be considered as one generation, but in the eyes of his opponents there was so much cruelty, felt such a craving for lawlessness and permissiveness, that it did not fit into the framework of decency and the understanding of the coach. The fight began sharply and fiercely. The guy with the knife scratched Winston's shoulder with the sharp blade almost immediately, as if teasing and inviting him to do more. The toughest of the three assailants grinned into Winston's eyes, trying to break him mentally at the start. The girl stood so still, mouth open, either from fear or confusion. "Get out of here," Winston shouted to her. "I don't want you here in a second." But she would not give up and shook her head vigorously. "I'm not leaving you alone with them. They've been after me for a long time. And here was a chance to be caught alone without friends, and even at a late hour. We all studied together at the university, boys from the elite, from the golden youth. And I am an orphanage. It's like a red rag for a bull, for them. Everyone wonders what kind of life I had in childhood and youth in a state institution. It was not customary for us to leave our own behind. I'll be there for you." Winston was so distracted by the girl's monologue that he missed a couple of solid punches to the ribs. Something crunched inside a fracture, he thought grudgingly. Meanwhile, the guy with the knife decided to have a different kind of fun. He jumped up behind the fellow student and pressed the blade against her lower cheek. "So you say, my kitty, you're not used to leaving your own behind," he grinned. "And if I scratch your throat on your cheeks now, will you abandon the whole park?" The girl, to everyone's surprise, who had been in a daze before, did not faint. She turned to the guy. A thin trickle of blood ran down her cheek. "I'm so sick of you at uni, you bastards and scum," she shouted. "You're nothing without your mums. You're nothing without a stick. That's what you can do for yourself in this life. If they take away your expensive car, your bling, your bank card, what will you know when you have to survive in a wild pack of teenagers?" None of the men involved in the fight expected such a fight from the pretty student. The boys were completely furious, even their faces darkened with uncontrollable rage. Having removed the knife from the girl's throat, her opponent joined his friends. Now they surrounded Winston on all sides, like a mass of bodies and faces distorted by anger. He himself could not remember how he had pushed their supposed leader in the chest with all his might. He did a sort of gymnastic somersault, lifting his feet off the ground, and fell down on his back. The back of his head struck the sturdy curb of the alley. A ruby stain of thick blood instantly began to spread beneath the young man's head. Winston, who had so many times taken his boys from the section to the infirmary after injuries, instantly realized that it was bad. Habitually, he put his finger on his opponent's neck in the place where a vein usually beat. There was no pulse. The rest was like a blur. The girl regained consciousness. "First, call an ambulance and the police now. Nobody leave," she commanded. The boys frantically began to grab their phones, making calls to parents, services, and important acquaintances. Winston sat down on the curb next to a guy and thought frantically. Cassandra is now at home with her parents, who wanted to keep an eye on her today. I'll be detained, most likely. What will happen to the girl? He quickly beckoned the young student over to him. "What's your name?" "I'm going to need your help." "I'm Maggie. Tell me what needs to be done." "I'm Winston. Here's a note with my address, my flat keys, my friends Miles and Vanessa's phone number. My 5-year-old daughter Cassandra is at her parents' house right now. Take her and give her to my friends. They'll take care of her." When the police, ambulance, and a bunch of other people arrived, Winston was somehow completely calm. As the saying goes, you can't be safe from jail or want, he thought. I guess it's my turn to learn what it's like to eat government bread and live behind bars. So many important gentlemen had arrived, commanding the men in the prison and the guards who had come with them. Winston was probably lucky that he was taken to the police car at once. Otherwise, the loose dogs surrounding the dead guy's powerful father would have killed Winston on the spot. Maggie, who had been rescued by him from the borderless scum, was always hanging around him. She even managed to show the ambulance the cut on her neck to get a certificate of beatings, all the time she was telling something to the operatives and the investigator. They were brought to the police together. Winston's documents and mobile phone were immediately taken away. While they were dealing with him, Maggie ran like a mouse to the side and made a few phone calls. Then, meeting Winston's eyes, she gave him a thumbs up, saying that the mechanism for taking care of his daughter had been set in motion. She turned out to be a desperate person who manages to keep up with everything. At the trial, she presented everything in such colors that the rich, successful relatives of the participants of the fight were even astonished by such frankness. She found witnesses that the trio of golden boys had been harassing and humiliating her for a long time. Everyone in their group respected her, while these fellow students disliked her. It's not a pretty picture for the victim. Of course, Winston never wanted to hurt a guy who was just starting to live. It was too cruel, even for a young man with a temper. It just worked out the way it did. He was given 5 years in a penal colony for excessive self-defense. Thanks to Maggie's efforts, the judge made the best decision for him. The prosecution insisted on 8 years in prison, but she kept trying to shift the case to a less serious article. Winston did not know exactly how Miles and Vanessa managed to agree with the guardianship authorities, but his daughter Cassandra was given to them for upbringing during his stay in the colony. During the investigation, their family gave birth to Thomas the rosy-cheeked Thomas. The ambulance crew in the city turned out to have connections because they often saved the children of not only ordinary people, but also important officials. When Vanessa was allowed a date, she was able to reassure Winston. "Don't worry, mate, we'll be fine. You and Christy are not strangers to us. I'll write to you about her life regularly and with pleasure. Miles and I will come to your place for a date as soon as we're allowed. I thought you were doing time in a neighboring state. Well, it's not that far for us. And tell me, what are we going to do about your rescued Maggie?" Maggie visits the daycare center all the time, bringing her toys and sweets. She asks for our permission to take the girl out of kindergarten, walk with her in the park, go to the cinema for the premiere of a cartoon. Here did not think that the girl will turn out to be such a loyal friend. We met with her, of course, not under the best, one could even say, tragic circumstances. She so actively defended you during the investigation, so fiercely acted in court as the main witness. You never know how someone like that will behave in extreme circumstances. She was a good one. Jesus, Winston, you're so naive when it comes to the opposite sex. She fell in love with you at first sight. Chivalrous demeanor, protective, good looks. But you're wrong about your age. She went to university after law school. She's 23 now. You're only 9 years apart. She's the one who looks so young because of her petite stature and general fragility. She's got character. Look at the girl. You can't take Christy back. You're going to have a lot of good things ahead of you. You both deserve it. The guard who led the prisoner after his date with the young woman didn't understand why the stout man was smiling all the way to his cell. He could not have guessed that Winston was thinking that there might be happiness in his life if this vivacious person with green eyes waited for him after his imprisonment. Love comes in many forms. Someone constantly trades feelings for trifles, and someone remains the chosen one for many years without fear and reproach. It's a matter of luck.